Hello, Valen here. As you could tell from the title of the video, I was busy this year. I watched 45 animated shows this year, and I even started this before the whole quarantine thing started. I came into this year thinking, you know what, I want to watch a bunch of animated shows from the last decade that I didn't ever get a chance to watch. And then the pandemic happened, and then I had even more time to watch all these shows on my own, stuck in my room. So, yeah, I watched 45 animated shows this year, and I figured I might as well make my own video on it instead of making the 2020 retrospective even longer than it already would be. I'm going to be kind of talking about these shows in a way that is unscripted. I do have notes in front of me, so hopefully I don't ramble on too much, but I don't want to make a script for something that's probably going to be like over an hour long or more. Also, there's going to be really minimal editing here, probably just like trailer footage and some background instrumental thing, I don't know. But yeah, I am going to be giving each of these shows a rating out of 10 based on our standard rating scale, which is that a 5 is true neutral, 7 is standard good, 3 is standard bad, and kind of going from there. Let's see. The overall, my goal for this is that I'm going to be talking about these shows as if I was trying to convince you whether or not you should watch them. So because of that, there's not going to be a lot of spoilers. There's going to be some minimal stuff that I have to talk about, but there's definitely going to be some things that I'm not going to talk about or just be pretty vague about stuff. That is a little bit of an issue because, again, there's some things that I would really like to talk about, but I just don't want to because, again, I don't want to spoil things. But I think not spoiling things is better because, again, I want to try to convince people of things to watch. And yeah. So I guess I might as well get started here. First of all, though, there are a couple shows to mention that I did not finish. I watched a couple of these episodes, and then I was just like, I'm not going to continue this, and it's for various reasons. So the first one of these is Regular Show. Now, of the shows here that I stopped watching, this is the one that I have the most potential to actually pick up again. I watched a couple episodes, just really wasn't feeling it. I don't know, like, there wasn't anything that I could specifically point to be like, I don't like this, but it was just like, I don't know, there wasn't really anything in it that stood out to me. It sort of felt like Gumball, but, like, less restrained, like, I guess more restrained, which I feel like the whole point of Gumball is to be as unrestrained as possible. So, I don't know, maybe the first couple episodes aren't that great, and I might check this out later, but I didn't go from here. The second thing that I started watching was Generator Rex, which is kind of a decent idea. The whole thing about, like, basically, humans have gained these powers through these, like, nanites that are kind of everywhere. It's sort of My Hero Academia-esque-ish, kind of. Not a terrible idea. I watched a few episodes. I just found the main reason I stopped was that Rex's character as a whole he comes off as, like, the stereotypical sort of, like, I'm the cocky teenager, and it's just like, I don't need to deal with you right now. I mean, I'm sure his characterization in actual show is going to be something like, he learns to actually work with others and not be annoying or whatever, and it's like, okay, fine, it's probably not bad, but I didn't want to deal with it, so I stopped from there. Again, maybe I'll check this out later on, but, I don't know. The third show is Wakfu, and if you don't know, this show is based on a French MMO, which was something that was kind of interesting to check out, some sort of fantasy show. I think, what the heck, I might as well look into it. But, oh boy. The first episode is very dense and very fast with tons of information that I just glossed over really, really quickly. But then after that, it's like, I watched, I think 4 or 5 episodes after that, and it was very slow and just very little happened, and the characters at best were bland, and at worst were, like, really obnoxious. So, yeah, I don't think I'm going to be continuing this one, which sucks because, again, I feel like it had some potential with it, but it just didn't work for me. And the last one is definitely something that, like, I could understand people really liking, but just wasn't for me, and that was The Midnight Gospel. Definitely the idea of sort of like an adult show from Pendleton Ward about kind of just random topics with sort of trippy animation. That's a cool idea, but I just think it's too unstructured for me. It's just not something I can get into. I mean, again, I watched the first 2 episodes. The first one, has all about people talking about, like, different kinds of drugs to use, and the second one was all spirituality, and I'm just like, this is not my thing. I don't care about this stuff. Again, I've heard it's really good. A lot of people really like it, especially the last episode I've heard is, like, really powerful emotionally. I don't know, it just didn't do anything for me, and I just think it's not my kind of thing. So if you like it, great, but it's not my thing. So, anyway, moving on to things that I actually finished. Specifically finished. Star Wars The Clone Wars actually finished, which is kind of amazing to me, honestly. It still is crazy to think that they actually came back and finished this show with a 7th season. I did not grow up watching the Clone Wars, but I actually watched these in college, and it's a weird show because a lot of people say that season 1 is sort of like not, that great. I think it's sort of like decent, but it's kind of not anything special. So I actually remember I watched a few episodes early on, and I was just like, okay, it's fine, but then I kind of stopped, and then I just didn't really pick it up for a while. But then I was like, what the hell, let me actually get back into this. And I watched the whole thing over, I don't know, a few weeks probably, and I just came to love this show. And honestly now, this show is one of my favorite shows of all time. And it's weird because it's not like, every episode is not amazing, right? But because it's an anthology series, the stuff that's not amazing it's kind of just not as important, right? So you just sort of, if there's something that you don't really care about, you just don't have to watch it, right? Because the plot is not all, every single episode is not super plot driven. So it works in that sense really well. But, when they actually got to the end of the show, well, at least it was canceled because of the Disney buyout, I was like, okay, well, that's it. And, season 5 is, like, the ending of season 5 is one of my favorite moments of, like, any piece of media ever. And then also the season 6 episodes were mostly pretty good, too. So I was like, yeah, it sucks we didn't get to the end of it, but I'm content with what we have. And so then when they announced, oh yeah, we are finishing season 7, it's like, oh, okay, I did not expect this to actually be a thing, because this kind of stuff almost never happens. And then it came out, and, it's overall really good. Well, okay, let me go into the individual arcs, because we got 12 episodes, 3 arcs each. The first arc is the Bad Batch arc, and I think this is the one I'm actually the most disappointed in, but I say that in a way where it's like, it's still good, but that's kind of it. It's just sort of, it's a decent set of episodes, decent action, more focus on the clones is always nice. But the main issue that I have is that, like, this arc and also the Crystal Crisis arc were released, like, as unfinished story reels online, after the buyout, and of the two, I think the Crystal Crisis arc is actually way more interesting, so I was kind of disappointed that they didn't do that one fully. And I just feel like this show, this arc by itself doesn't really have that much of a reason to exist. I guess in terms of the show itself, right? I mean, now there's been announced it's going to be a Bad Batch show, which is sort of like a, kind of more like a sequel to Clone Wars, which is interesting, so I guess it works in that sense. But, and I have also heard that, like, Dave Filoni specifically wanted to have, besides the final arc, which was, of course, a big deal, he wanted an arc for Ahsoka, and he wanted an arc for Rex and the Clones, because those are sort of the new, characters of the Clone Wars, and he wanted to focus on them. So, okay, fine, I guess that's fair. But again, so for me, Bad Batch, decent arc, nothing super special, it's fine. The Martez sisters arc, this is the one that everyone, like, complained about, and that it was, like, bad, and the Martez sisters are annoying and lame or whatever. And honestly, I don't mind this arc. I actually, if anything, I think I like it a little bit more than the Bad Batch arc, more so for what it represents than what it does specifically, because I really like this sort of, like, outsider, random person's perspective on the Clone Wars conflict, and, like, the Jedi as, like, an institution. And how, even the Jedi, of course, are portrayed as, oh, here's the good guy Jedi. It's like, well, they're kind of, like, out-of-touch elitists. So, and how it goes into that, I think, is interesting. The story itself of these episodes isn't great, and also there's, like, that one episode that basically doesn't need to exist at all. So I get it, and I think, honestly, one of the reasons that people complain about this especially is that because we only got 12 episodes, having a third of the season, the final season, devoted to this story, it does feel kind of anticlimactic, so I get it in that sense, but if like, season 7 was, like, a 20 or 22 episode season, I don't think people would be as hard on these episodes as they are. But, I'm sure basically Disney came to them and was like, alright, you can make 12 episodes, and, I'm sure they're like, well, we gotta make an arc on Ahsoka, and this was an idea that they had, probably, so, yeah, it makes sense. I get the side of the criticism, though, but I don't think it's as bad as people say it is, but I understand if people were, like, kind of disappointed by it, so, guess that's fair. But of course, what everyone talks about is the Siege of Mandalore episodes, and those are very, very good. I still do think the end of Season 5 is my favorite of the show, but is this second? I think so. It's close. There's a lot of really good arcs in this show. But, Siege of Mandalore is very good. Of course, Darth Maul in Clone Wars is excellent. And, just seeing stuff happening with there. It just does things really, really well. And the ending is very interesting in terms of the tone of it and how things go from there. So it's very, very well done overall. And it's interesting because, like, in terms of a rating, like, if you ask me to average out, like, give a rating to each of the arcs and average them out, I'd probably give both Bad Batch and Martez Sisters arc, like, a 7, and Siege of Mandalore, like, very high 9, probably. Would it quite be 10? I don't know. It's right around there. But So you think, okay, that averages out to be like an 8. But the thing is, if I did that for every single episode of the Clone Wars show as a whole, it would also probably be kind of similar, and you wouldn't think, well, why is this show one of your favorites of all time if, like you say, it's the average of all episodes is an 8. But again, it's the structure of the show. The fact that it's an anthology series helps in this sense, because again, the good stuff really stands out as being good, and the stuff that's like decent but not great, it's just sort of not that important, and it doesn't really matter as much if a show was just purely just every episode leads into the next plot-wise. So you can kind of take that into account for this season here, and honestly, again, just the fact that we got the season at all is very impressive. So I am going to give it a 9. It's a bit of a lower 9, but it's still good enough for mine. Again, just seeing this stuff again is just automatically great. So yeah, Star Wars: The Clone Wars 7th season gets a 9. Very glad we got it, and I think overall it was definitely worth everything. So yeah. However, if there was a show or a season of a show that was more hype than Clone Wars season 7, it was She-Ra the Princesses of Power season 5. Now, again, if you don't know me, yes, this is not a troll. This show is like so good. I found this last year in September, and I don't even know why I decided to check it. I think I'd heard some rumbling somewhere that, hey, it's actually pretty good. And I was like, oh, what the hell? Sure, I'll look into it. Figuring I probably wouldn't get attached to it that much. And honestly, seasons 1 and 2 are not great. Like, they're decent, they're good, but they're not, like, especially great. There are some great moments in seasons 1 and 2, particularly revolving generally around Catra, who ended up becoming one of my favorite characters ever. Not because of who she is, but because of, like, just what they do with her in terms of her character, I think is very, very good. But it was enough, basically, season 1 and 2 had enough really great stuff and some interesting moments to keep me wanting to see more. And then we get to season 3, and it's like, oh, okay, this is really good. And then season 4 continues with that. And then so I was really, really hyped to see the finale of season 5. And I was saying before the finale, I'd said stuff like, if they nail this ending, this might be one of my favorite shows of all time. And well, they kind of did. There's so little I could talk about because, again, it's just it's the last season of a show, and so even if I don't spoil things about season 5, just talking about the presentation of season 5 spoils like the previous seasons. So there's basically nothing specific I can talk about, but it was to me, this was satisfying, and there's something that happens in this season. Again, people who have seen the show, obviously one of the main plot points of the season, know what I'm talking about probably. That it was something where initially I was against it happening, but and I was kind of worried that they would do this. I'm like, I don't want them to do this thing. And the thing is, not only did the show actually do it, but they did it in such a way that I basically was like, yeah, I was wrong. How they presented this, it absolutely was the right way to do it. So yeah, I love this. I cried 3 times. I was a mess with the show. It's so good. She-Ra the Princesses of Power is one of my favorite shows of all time, and season 5 is phenomenal. I got super emotional at several points. It's fantastic. 10 out of 10. I don't care. Fight me. Whatever. Now, another season that I this isn't even a new season, it's more a continuation of a season that came out earlier this year, is the second half of Rick and Morty season 4. Now, the first half from last year was kind of not great. I mean, there was some stuff that was decent, but most of the episodes were just sort of fine, and I was honestly kind of worried. I legitimately was is Rick and Morty kind of losing its streak? I mean, I know a lot of people kind of complained about season 3 also a bit. I do think season 3 was a little bit worse than seasons 1 and 2, but not significantly really. I wasn't worried, but after the first part of season 4, I was worried. Oh, are they actually? This is starting to be not great anymore. So I was really unsure about how to approach the second half of season 4, but I think it worked a lot better. The continuity train episode was definitely a fun concept and just weird, but in a good way. There was that face sucker kind of episode, the second one there, a bit more of a standard episode, but it was still pretty good. Of course, the Vat of Acid episode, everyone said that one's definitely the best of the season, and it is. I think the episode 9 with the planet kid stuff was the weakest one, but even then it's still probably better than most of the stuff in the first half of season 4. Then the finale was also pretty good too. So, I really don't have any major problems with this season 4. Season 4 to me, the second half of season 4, it felt yeah, okay, this is the same good Rick and Morty that I've used to seeing. So I'm just now confused, what happened to the first half? Why was that noticeably worse quality than the second half? Because honestly, the second half, I think I am going to also give it a 9 out of 10. It's definitely, it's a lower 9 out of 10. But it was really enjoyable. There was a lot of stuff that was great. It was funny. It had some really interesting, weird concepts, and it worked really well. So I'm just confused. Why did the first half just not do very well? And I don't know. So, I guess we'll find out. At least now, hey, I'm not worried for the show's future at this point anymore. And now I'm not like, oh no, are they losing their edge? Well, maybe not. We'll see how things go from here. But, yeah. Let's see, a few quick things to knock out, other seasons of stuff that I've seen. The Big Hero 6 show, Season 2, it's alright. It's more disjointed than the first season, especially the second half is a bit more kind of loose. And honestly, like, Season 3 is, from what I know, is that they think they split it where now there's sort of like 2 half episodes released at a time. Honestly, I don't know, I'm kind of not a fan of that format, so I haven't even watched Season 3. Season 2, I think I'm going to give a 6. It was, it's fine. Kind of not that great. It doesn't do anything really particularly wrong, but I don't know, there's nothing really took me that much. So, yeah, it gets a 6. And then, also, more episodes from DC Superhero Girls. Again, I think it's still just decent, so continues to be... I'd say before, last year, those episodes were a 6. This one, still, it's a 6. Nothing really too interesting in that way in that case. But then, we get to Infinity Train. Now... Infinity Train Season 1, I think, is very good. I'd probably give it, like, a low 9 or something. Definitely had characters to connect to, and was, had some legitimately strong emotional moments, some other good characterization happening there. And the whole... When they announced at the beginning of this of 2020, with they were continuing on, or actually I think they announced the 2020, whatever, and how it was going to be sort of an anthology where, like, each season was focusing on different characters, I was like, yes, perfect, that's exactly what I wanted. I'm really excited to see where this goes. Season 2, I think, is a bit of a step down from Season 1. And it's for a couple of reasons. The lore of the train is still very good. That aspect of it, especially sort of the later parts of the episodes where you actually learn a little bit more about how the train works and what it is, that is very well done. So that's still very good. But in terms of the characters, there's the deer. I think, what was it, Alan Dracula? I think that was the name they gave him. He was just, he didn't really have a character. He doesn't talk, so, okay, there's that. Mere Tulip, she definitely has her own arc that's different from, like, the original Tulip, for sure. But it still did kind of feel like I'm just sort of watching Tulip again. I don't know. It's sort of like, I wished it was kind of more different than it was. Not bad, but it was still felt like a little bit too similar. And then Jesse, I like the angle they're going for with him, because if each character has sort of their own issue they have to work through on the train, and I actually really like the issue they chose for Jesse, but they don't really explore it that much. They sort of bring it up, I think in episode 4 or 5 or so, and I'm like, oh, okay, yes, I'm glad they're actually touching on this, and they just kind of don't touch on it anymore until the very end, and like, oh, and he doesn't feel this way anymore, and it's like, oh, okay, it's just not that exciting and not that interesting how they handle it, even though conceptually I think it could be really interesting. And also just Jesse as a character, I think is kind of annoying. So, again, overall, it's still Infinity Train. It's still good. I think I'm going to ultimately give it a 7. Again, it's a very high 7 for Season 2. It's still good. I've seen a fair amount of people say they like it more than Season 1. Again, I don't agree with that, but I don't think you're, like, crazy if you think that. So, yeah. However, then we get to Season 3. And Season 2 introduced the Apex, this sort of group of kids who had just been on the train and were kind of there just doing their own thing, specifically trying to stay on the train because, they thought the high numbers were good. And it was pretty clear from Season 2 that, like, these were, who they should focus on for Season 3, and that's what they did. We have Grace and Simon from, being the main character of Season 3, along with Tuba and... oh god, I forgot the girl's name. Crap. Okay, well, her. And it's... Season 3 is very good. In fact, Season 3 is the best season of the show. And I think there's a couple of reasons. One is that this one actually was on HBO Max, and I'm wondering if that actually did affect things in terms of, like, what they could get away with. Because they get away with kind of a lot in this season, in terms of what, an animated kids show would have. But also, I think what helps is that these characters are different from Seasons 1 and 2, right? Grace and Simon are, like, adults, probably. They're probably, I'd say they're 20-ish, that's probably what I would guess. And you can tell there is differences here. They are not the same characters as the others, and that difference is really good. I think it's very interesting how Grace and Simon are handled very differently in terms of they both kind of start in similar places with their characters, but one goes in one way and one goes the other way, and I think that's both handled very, very well. There is a lot of very emotionally powerful moments in this season, and there's just this sort of overall, like, more sinister tone to everything that's going on. Everything feels like a bit meaner, but like in a good way, in terms of how it gives more stakes in what's going on, and you feel the tension in this season really strongly. And the ending is, again, it's very different. It's a very different ending. This is not what I expected in terms of like a season 3, and it was in terms of what characters that would be focused on, but again, this feels like, you have like a show. Think like how people said like how Korra was like the more mature sort of sequel to Avatar or whatever, and I'm not saying that like that's, I'm not going to get into the debate about Korra versus Avatar, but like this actually kind of feels like that. But again, it's still like in terms of actually happening. But again, it's still the same. It's just season 3. You're already having this shift, though, in terms of, like, we're really shifting this into more of a sort of mature, serious direction, even though the first 2 seasons still had that to some degree. And it really works here. And I know there's an issue about, like, whether or not that the show is actually going to be, renewed for more seasons. And I really hope it is, because they have so much potential for, this kind of story. I think I remember reading that the guy has, like, the main creator for the show, he has ideas for 8 total seasons. Which I'm totally down for. I really want to see more. I have an idea of, assuming again they keep with the tradition of sort of like side characters introduced in one season being the main characters of the next season. Then there is definitely a launching point for what season 4 would be about that I think also would be very interesting. So yeah, I really recommend Infinity Train. Again, season 2 I think is a little bit down. I give it a 7, but season 3, a 9, solid 9. I think it does an extremely good job. So yeah, Infinity Train, definitely solid. And then, just very shortly, just a couple weeks ago, we had the continuation, season 2, of Hilda. Now, if you watched our Show Sunday video at the beginning of December about Hilda, I said that season 1 of Hilda the word is to use is wholesome. It's very, very wholesome. It's just nice characters doing just nice things with each other, has this great warm feeling to it. It just makes you feel good watching the show, and it does that very, very well. Season 2 is a little bit different, just a little bit. It doesn't feel like, it's a radically different show again, but there's a little bit more of an edge to things. Just a little bit. It's a little bit more serious, there's a little bit higher stakes in things. And I'm not 100% sure how I feel about that. Like, I'm not saying it's bad, but is it better or worse than season 1? And I don't know. The more serious tone is interesting, because of what they, again, not really what they get away with, but what they end up doing. It's surprising. The highlights for me are particularly episodes 8 and 9. I'm not, again, in terms of what happens, but there's, like, the thing is, the sort of more serious elements, it allows for some more emotional moments, and episodes 8 and 9 in particular are, like, actually really legitimately emotional in terms of what happens, and so you have that as a benefit, but again, you do lose a bit of this really nice, wholesome feeling in season 1. It's not quite there as much as it was, so I don't know how to compare them exactly, but again, this is coming from someone who really likes season 1, so saying, hey, is season 2, is it better or worse than season 1, and I'm not sure, well, then I guess it's still really good, right? So, yeah. That said, I will say that the ending of season 2 is, like, very surprising, and I'm very curious how this is going to play out in terms of the ending, because, like, it's not conclusive. I'll just say it that way. So yeah, I mean, I said before probably that I'd give season 1 a low 9. So I guess I'm giving season 2 a low 9. It works. So yeah. Now that's all of the sort of new seasons of shows I've seen before, but there's also a new show in the same sort of canon and same universe as other shows, and that is the third Tales of Arcadia show, Wizards. So I'd seen Troll Hunters and Three Below last year, and I don't love the shows, but I overall like them a good amount. My favorite actually is season 1 of Three Below, because it's just freaking crazy. It's just really wacky and weird in a way that actually is pretty entertaining. But overall, I don't think the shows are phenomenal, but they're pretty good, enjoyable, solid shows. So I was like, I was curious to see where things are going. But this show is weird because, Troll Hunters ends with, the main conflict being ended, and basically saying, okay, now us characters are going to go on this sort of self-discovery journey together, and that's sort of the end of Troll Hunters. You're like, okay, that's fair. So Wizards, you're thinking, all right, so are they going to kind of pick up with that, and they just sort of like skip over it. It's just like, oh, and they're back from doing that, and it's like, well, what did they do though? And it's like they never really kind of go into it, and you know, they don't really spend time like introducing any of the characters, and you're probably thinking like, well, yeah, we already know them, and it's like, yeah, but like the thing is, the show does shift the focus of characters to, you know, different ones, and it acts like we're supposed to know these characters already, and we do, at least in concept, but we don't really in terms of their actual characterization that much, especially the main guy in this show. I don't even remember what his name is, so that's my point, is that like I don't remember his name, I don't remember, you know, it's just not that memorable, and you know, the humor in these shows I feel like is kind of hit or miss. Again, I think the randomness in season 1 to 3 below is actually good, but like, you know, then you have I think his name was Toby, is that his name? Who's I just don't find funny. I just find him kind of annoying. And so it's a bit hit or miss. And honestly, I think it's a bit more miss in Wizards. I don't know, it just feels kind of weird. You know, it just does, I don't know, it's a lot of writing just doesn't really fit that well. There is some nice animation, and some the character design is actually pretty interesting in terms of like some of the new characters. Bellrock does like look pretty cool, for example. But just as a show, again, it feels like we sort of missed a bit of the story, and that this is some sort of like, I don't know. The thing is, it doesn't really resolve itself either. And apparently, they are going to make this like sort of a movie that sort of ties everything together as a finale. So this really just feels like, oh, it's just sort of prelude to the movie. Right, so it's kind of weird. It's in this weird state where it's like it does something's okay and something's kind of and like I don't know. It looks nice, but like substantially, so I don't know. It also does feel very rushed. It definitely feels like they rushed through things. So it's not bad. I don't know. I guess 5. It gets a 5. It's okay. Kind of disappointing, but not the worst thing in the world. Okay, so those are all the shows, again, that are either coming off of shows they've seen before, or new seasons from shows that I'd already seen. And now we're going to get into fully new shows that I had never seen before whatsoever. So let's get into probably what I would say is the most influential animated show of all of the 2010s, Adventure Time. I'd never seen Adventure Time before. Of course, I knew of it, and I'd seen a couple clips here and there, but I'd never actually really seriously watched it to any degree. So... And I know that, like, it's one of those shows where, like, oh, it's like a goofy show or whatever. Like, that's the whole thing. It's kind of goofy and random and weird. But I also knew that people said that, hey, that's how it's presented, but there is some serious and legitimate stuff in here, too. So with that in mind, I came into the show, and it still surprised me, actually, how, again, legitimately serious there were some moments of the show, and legitimately also kind of emotional, and profound is a strong word, but like in that realm of kind of stuff that the show gets into. So it's definitely worth there. And the characters, the main characters, I like all of them. Finn, Jake, Bubblegum, Ice King. I like them all. Marceline, though, is my favorite character. I definitely think she has just the best in that sense. The side characters are mostly good. The only one I don't really like is Lemon Grab. I don't know, I just didn't really find him really that funny or interesting. But I like the others decently well. I actually really like Susan Strong, kind of interestingly. I don't know, I just think her story is particularly compelling. Specifically, the Islands arc is very good. My favorite moment of the show is during the Islands arc. It's episode, is it 4? It's the Lost and Found episode. I think that's what it's called. That moment with... Yeah, that's my favorite episode and favorite moment of the show. But again, Hide and Seek, that's the name of the episode. Yeah, and then there's also other episodes, like there's, Puhoy, that episode, the Hall of Egress episode, and like there's other ones like that are like weirdly somber and like kind of, again, not profound, that's not the right word, but it's this sort of like, it's weird, it's this sort of serious kind of like introspection of like the world, and it's just like, it's just kind of trippy, and, it's very interesting to kind of see this coming from, again, I watched like this whole show, by the way, in like 2 weeks. I like binged the whole thing in 2 weeks. And, maybe that's why, because I have seen a lot of people talk about like the middle seasons are kind of not great. I don't know. I didn't really agree with that. I thought it was all fine. I didn't really notice any particular dips in quality. I mean, there's a couple episodes here and there that are not great. Some of like the guest animated episodes are not very good. There's that one where they're at like a water park. Like that was kind of a dumb episode, for example. But also because, again, it's sort of like Clone Wars. not every episode is super important. So like there's some episodes that are not that great, but like you just sort of forget about them, and you just sort of, they don't, there's not like an episode that sort of ruins the show, right? So, overall I still really like what we got. And the ending, I have seen a little bit of complaint about the ending being a little bit rushed, which I kind of agree a little bit, but honestly, again, I still think it was just very, very enjoyable. I do think it was very emotionally satisfying in terms of the ending. So yeah, I think it works overall quite well. And then also there's the Adventure Time Distance Land stuff that's going on. We had the BMO one earlier this year, and just like a bit ago there was Obsidian with Marceline and Bubblegum. I think both of those were done quite well. It's still continuing on to everything. I give Adventure Time a solid 9. I think it does everything really well. Again, there's a few things here and there that are not great, but like as an overall product, I'm totally down with it. I'm totally glad I watched it. Definitely understand, why it got so popular, and I can definitely also see the influence of this show on so many other shows. So yeah, Adventure Time, you get a 9. Did a very good job. Another show that had been popular in the last few years, that this one's actually based on something that I had no real familiarity with, and that's the new Ducktales show. The original show, I have no history with it whatsoever, but I'd heard this reboot was good, and I was just like, what the heck, I might as well look into it. And one thing that I have heard is that in the original show, the 3 kids have kind of similar personalities. They don't really stand out too much. Where here, they definitely do. We're having Huey be all the stereotypical nerdy guy who's all focused on the knowledge of everything. Dewey is just sort of I guess kind of the jock, where he's like, I just want to do stuff. He's kind of in it for he's in it for the adventure, in it for the thrills. And then Louis is just sort of greedy and wants, money. It's like, all right, fine, so I appreciate that. I like their characters there. And they all have sort of different reasons to actually go out on these adventures with, Scrooge or whoever. And I think that works out really well. Webby, people have said that she's kind of a knockoff Mabel from Gravity Falls. And, yeah, but, I don't know. I enjoy her character. I think it's overall pretty good. Scrooge works well. Other characters are good, too. Don't really have anything particular to say about them. Launchpad is Launchpad's probably the one where I'm the most, I'm not 100% sure how I feel about, his humor, but not terrible. And actually, one character that I do like a lot, and this is a spoiler, kind of, but, they reveal this character at least exists very early on, so I really like Della. Her being, the mom, I think is very interesting, because the thing is, she's not a good mom, but, she knows she isn't, so she's trying to get better. And I think that is really interesting, really compelling in terms of that for her character. So I actually really like her character. The villains are all over the place in a good way. They're just all really weird and random. Weirdly enough, I think my favorite villain is Mark Beaks, because he's such a shithead, but I don't know. He's so annoying, but annoying in a way where I kind of am glad to see him on screen, because I just want to see all him get punished. I don't know. It's just such a weird thing, right? And I'm kind of disappointed that I think in season 3, we have gotten almost no Mark Beaks, which is sad. I don't even know if we got him at all. But yeah, overall, it's just a really solid show. I am disappointed, of course, when people said that the show is going to be canceled in 2021. But it does seem that it's not a sudden cancellation. So hopefully they do get an actual solid finale in place that does seem to tie things together. We know that there's 10 episodes left, they've said, which is enough time, I think, for them to definitely make the show feel like it wasn't a rushed ending. So hopefully that goes well. It's I haven't anything particularly excellent to say about the show, but I think it does everything quite well. And if you just want a kind of a nice, fun sort of adventure show with fun characters, good dialogue, decent animation, then yeah, I might as well you think you should check it out. I'd give it a high 8. Does its job quite well, and works really well in that sense. Another show that is sort of that was in the 2010s that was a remake revitalization of an 80s show is the 2011 ThunderCats reboot. Now, I'd heard that for a long time before Young Justice sort of came back, that Young Justice was the show that everyone said, oh, this is the great show of the early 2010s that was canceled or whatever. But then when Young Justice came back, then people say, oh, the ThunderCats reboot is sort of the great show of the early 2010s that was canceled and we haven't gotten it back. And it's not to the same degree as Young Justice. Young Justice is very good. This show, it has potential for sure, but as is, I think it's kind of standard. Again, like with DuckTales, I don't have any history with the original ThunderCats. I don't know anything really about it. I'm just coming into this for watching this show by itself, and I just think it's standard. It's standard in a good way. You know, it has characters are fine. There's decent episode, decent moments and stuff, but there isn't really anything in here that like specifically grabs me. It's like, ooh, this is really interesting, right? There isn't really any of that. So it's, I don't know. It's one of those things where like it definitely had potential to get good, right? So when people talk about how like, oh, it's a shame this was canceled, because the thing is, season 1 does just end. It's not really like a, you know, an actual like closing of really any plot lines. It's anything. It's sort of like a cliffhanger where it's like, oh, now this has happened. Okay, we're gonna deal with that in the next season, and then there is no next season. So like that sucks, but it is you know, so, and there definitely could have been a lot more potential. I could see this getting, you know, quite good as they expand on things. As is, I think it's decent. I think that's the best way to look at it from my end. So if you're curious, I'd say you can go check it out. But just keep in mind, it does not end satisfyingly because it wasn't supposed to end at this time. But yeah, I'll give it a mid-low 7. Yeah, I guess 7. Sort of just, it works. It's pretty good, decent. But yeah, so that works there. Another show that was also kind of similar in terms of, you know, early 2010s that was also canceled after 1 season is Sym-Bionic Titan. Now, this show, I didn't realize something about the show, is that I had seen a clip from the show, and it was one of those things where I'm like, this has to be some fan thing and not from an actual show. No, it's from an actual show. This show gets raunchy, like surprisingly so, and it's like, whoa, okay, they did that, all right, and like there's definitely some theories about like that's why it was canceled, but it's surprising. And the thing is, this show kind of goes off the rails at certain points, and like it's more entertaining than ThunderCats. I would say that it's more entertaining, but at the same time, it is a bit looser, and I don't think the characterization, it is a bit there's some stuff that's kind of, you know, basically, ThunderCats is more like all of it is sort of decent. Sym-Bionic Titan, it has some stuff that actually is pretty funny, is pretty good, and then stuff that's kind of not. So it's a bit more all over the place. I think ultimately I would rate it a little bit higher than ThunderCats. Like, so still a 7, but a bit higher of a 7. If you want to see some weird stuff, go check it out. But also just keep in mind that, again, it doesn't really have a satisfying conclusion either. So there's that. Another show that is from a property I don't have any connection with, but, you know, I'd heard was very good in the early 2010s, was Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Now, again, nothing really Scooby-Doo. I don't even really like Scooby-Doo that much. I don't dislike Scooby-Doo. It's sort of just like, I don't know, it's Scooby-Doo, like, whatever. So when I heard people talking about, oh, Mystery Incorporated's a legitimately really good show, I was like, yeah, okay, I mean, I'm sure it's good for Scooby-Doo, but, like, it's Scooby-Doo. How good can it actually be, right? And, well, it's actually pretty good. You know, the characterization is actually good. You know, they again, this might sound like a spoiler, but it's from the beginning of the show. Velma is dating Shaggy, and like it works. It's really weird that like that works, but it does. The dialogue is actually really good. I remember one of the first things I saw about this show was like a sassy Velma compilation on YouTube, and yeah, she's got some sass. It's really entertaining with that, and there's just the characterization definitely makes this show for me as good as it is. And you know what's the weirdest thing about this show? The best character in the show is Fred. I'm serious. The best character in the show is Fred, because they actually give him, like, legitimate personality and, like, you know, conflict with him and with his character, and it's really good. So Fred is the best character of the show. And, you know, the story itself, it is sort of an overall plot of what's happening, and it's interesting. You actually are curious to see how things are going and trying to figure out what's going on overall, and it works really well. And I will say, the ending of this show is dark. Like, it's another one of those where it's like, whoa, they went there. And again, this is Scooby-Doo, and they went to certain places where it's like, oh boy, okay. So, yeah. But, you know, unless you, like, really hate Scooby-Doo, I'd say definitely check this out. I think it's really enjoyable. Definitely glad I saw it. It was better than I thought it was going to be. So, yeah, this... I think this is another kind of similar to DuckTales. I think if it's a high 8, it just does its stuff really well, and, you know, it definitely should be seen. So, yeah. Another older show that older in the sense that, like, again, early 2010s, but also something that is from a property that's several decades old, is the Looney Tunes show. Again, the one from, like, I think it was 2011 to 2014. The one where they're kind of living in suburbia, right? And again, this show, I heard there was a bit of, like, some controversy in terms of, like, you know, oh, they're living in the suburbs, like, oh, you know, it's kind of lame or whatever. But I don't mind that aspect, honestly. And I think it overall actually works pretty well. What's actually surprising, because again, I don't really have that much background with Looney Tunes either, and like Daffy Duck is like a giant asshole, but like in a fun way. I don't know. Like, and I'm like, was he actually always this much of an ass? Like, I don't know. It's just kind of funny. He was probably the most entertaining character just because of how just mean he is. It's just like, okay, sure, just go that far about it. And, you know, but other characters work pretty well, too. Again, Bugs is good. The Lola interpretation for this is definitely interesting, where, you know, she's, like, kind of a crazy, like, crazy girlfriend kind of thing, and I think it works really well there. There are some episodes that I think are a little bit flat, especially the final episode, I feel is, like, kind of like, oh, that's it? Like, I don't know, it's kind of, okay, whatever. It doesn't really have anything that great about it, and like there are like a bunch of the songs they called like merry melodies or whatever, and for like a while early on in the show, it's like every episode has one of these, and honestly I just don't think they're that great. So there's that. They do kind of taper off, and there aren't really as many of them later on, so that's something. But you know, I think it's a good show. Definitely some things that are not like phenomenal about it, but it's good, and I do think if you maybe put yourself off a show like, you know, Looney Tunes in the suburbs, that's weird or whatever, you should at least check it out. I give it high 7. I think high 7 is good for a Looney Tunes show. It seems to make sense for this. That, you know, it's good. A couple missteps here and there, but overall pretty good and solid. Now, I have watched, in terms of superhero shows, I've watched a bunch of DC stuff, right? I watched the entire DCAU back a couple years ago, you know, Batman, Superman, Justice League, all those kind of things. And so I'm familiar with a lot of the DC cartoons, but I never watched any of the Marvel cartoons. And so I specifically wanted to check out the Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, because I'd heard from a lot of people that, again, this was, you know, a really, really good show in terms of, you know, Marvel animated show. So I was like, no, what the hell, I might as well look into this. And, you know, I mean, I know about the MCU films, but I don't really know anything about the characters outside of that. So I was curious to check it out and see some different interpretations of the characters. And it's interesting because, like, a lot of the characters are, you know, very similar to the MCU counterparts, but some of them are actually fairly different. And it is also interesting seeing, like, kind of who they focus on, and in terms of what they do. For example, how, you know, just the fact that, like, you know, Ant-Man and the Wasp, who are actually Hank and Janet instead of, you know, Scott and what's her name? I forgot her name. Hope? Yeah. You know, in the movies. Like that, you know, that, and how they're actually, like, you know, founding members of the Avengers. It's interesting just to see some of the differences. I do think the animation helps to sort of kind of let them, like, get away with things that they wouldn't necessarily be able to do as well as in live action. Like, AIM? I think, and the guy, is it MODOK? Is that the dude? The dude in AIM with the big head? That would be really odd to see in live action. So, you know, there's some stuff that works there. But it's overall good. Again, the characters overall are good. I actually like Wasp actually quite a lot. I think she's my favorite character in the show. But, you know, overall, I think everyone does pretty well. I do think, like, season 2 it gets things that get a bit disjointed. And the finale also is one of those where, like, the finale itself, I think, has, like, conceptually it's very good. Of, like, kind of what threat happens, but it does seem to kind of come a little bit out of nowhere. So it's a little bit of a weak finish, but overall I think it does handle things pretty well. I do think that, like, you know, it would be interesting to see how, like, if this kind of show did follow sort of like solo shows, like how the Justice League show followed, you know, Batman and Superman and all that kind of stuff. I think that would have helped, because it does kind of just dump you into everything pretty quickly early on. So, you know, for example, if this was my first introduction to Marvel characters at all, I don't know how I would feel about it, right? Whereas, like, you know, if the DCAU was my first introduction to DC characters, I think that would have been totally fine. So it hits a little bit from that. Again, I think, like, the Justice League show, the animated Justice League show is one of my favorite shows of all time. So it's not up there, but it's still good. I'm gonna give it an 8, a lower 8, mostly because, again, sort of the second season sort of ends a little bit weakly. And I don't think there's any moments in this show that are, like, really good. Whereas, like, the Justice League show has some phenomenal episodes, and I don't think this ever reaches that height. But overall, pretty much the standard episode is quite good, and I think that is enough to get it to a low 8. So, yeah. Moving on to something completely different, BoJack Horseman. So, you know, I knew the general opinion of BoJack Horseman. Everyone says it's a really great show, but also kind of depressing and dealing with, you know, kind of shitty people. And so I knew that coming into it, but I didn't really know any plot things or anything like that. I was curious to see it. I heard that season 1 was like not good, but honestly, I don't think season 1 was that bad. It was definitely not as good as the other seasons. But I don't know, I was kind of surprised like how much that people apparently don't like season 1. I thought it was sort of fine. But yeah, it's just not as interesting. But as things definitely build, and it is a slow build, it's a slow burn of a show where it's one of those things where, like, at least for me, I didn't really realize when I started to get really invested in things, but I just sort of was like halfway through the show and I was like, oh, I'm actually really invested in what's going on. So it takes a while. And it is kind of slow. And you are dealing with characters who make bad decisions. And I know some people, they just can't really kind of get into that, where, like, you know, the hero of the show, which is not even really, I wouldn't even use that word, but, you know, the protagonist, main character, he's, like, not really that great of a person. And some people just kind of don't really get into that. So, like, I definitely understand where some people just would not get into this show. Like, honestly, I would not tell my mom to watch this show, right? It's not that kind of a show. But I think it does work. It largely does work for me quite well. And there are definitely, like, there's a fair amount of oh shit moments in terms of just what happens and the presentation of things that work really well. I do think, you know, even though the characters make bad decisions, you at least understand why they are making the decision at the moment. Even if, of course, you don't agree with it. I mean, you shouldn't agree with it. But it does work in that sense. And it's very interesting in that sense. And there are, of course, several standard episodes. I noticed a lot of the episodes that are the best episodes are the second to the last episodes of the seasons. I've noticed that. A View from Halfway Down, definitely the second last episode of the entire show, is probably my favorite one. But other ones too. I can't think of the episode names off the top of my head. There's the Free Churro episode. Of course, that's a great one. So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that's really good in that sense. And so it's interesting though, because like, when I say that I like the show, it's like, I don't know if I like it, but this isn't really a show that you like, because, you know, like, if I met these people in real life, I would not like them. They're not, you know what I mean? But it's not that. It's more, it's interesting. It's very interesting. And there's a lot of very interesting moments, interesting characters, interesting scenarios. And I do think this does work very, very well in terms of what it is trying to do. It's not for everyone. I definitely see that. So I'm not going to say that everyone has to see this. Definitely just be prepared to watch stuff that's not pleasant. I'll say that. And I'm going to give it a 9. In fact, I'm going to give it a pretty high 9. It's not 10, but it is a pretty high 9 in terms of what it manages to do and what it manages to pull off. So there's a lot of great stuff here. Definitely something to check out. But I'm not going to say everyone has to see it. So there's that. Now, there is one show that I saw, not from the 2010s, but actually from earlier. I saw Kim Possible. Now, you know, this is definitely one of those shows of the 2000s that, like, a lot of people have praised. And if anything, you might think this would be a show that I grew up watching, but I actually had pretty limited TV access growing up, so I did not watch this show. And, you know, I knew the premise of it. I was definitely curious to see, you know, how it could be and how I might like it. And ultimately, I think I've determined that while the show is, like, doesn't really have any problems with it, it just isn't really for me. Especially the first 2 seasons. The first 2 seasons, for me, were just not that interesting. I can't really point to any specific reason. Again, the characters are fine, the stories are fine, the dialogue's fine, but again, that's sort of it to me. It was just sort of, everything was just felt fine, and I wasn't really getting anything out of these seasons. Once it got to season 3 and 4, then I felt the dialogue got better, and I got more interested, and I thought things were funnier. It was just overall better, it was more engaging. But before that, I was honestly not really sure what score to give it. I was like, do I even give this a 5? Like, I don't know. It was maybe a 6. But I think ultimately, like, especially with season 3, I'm going to bump it up to just barely squeaking a 7. Again, I can totally understand, especially if you grew up with the show, that you really, really like it. But I think me watching it now as, you know, a mid-20s guy in 2010, that, like, it just isn't made for me, and that's fine. So I am going to squeak this just under into a 7 out of 10, purely because of, again, I think season 3 and after that is at least a bit better, and I can feel that there. But, yeah, definitely, you know, I mean, if you haven't seen it, I mean, you might as well check it out. But I understand why someone who grew up with this would really like it. I was a little bit more mixed about it, but, yeah, overall. Now, okay, so those are all shows that were released previously, mostly in the 2010s. Now, let's get into shows that actually, like, aired, you know, this year. Or at least much more recently. One of those was, well, we had Star Wars: The Clone Wars, and of course after that we had, well, I guess between the Clone Wars and the final season 7, there was Star Wars Rebels, which overall I think is pretty good, though there's some, not as good as Clone Wars, but overall pretty good. But then there's Star Wars Resistance. Now, I remember, like, when this show was first sort of revealed, and everyone was kind of shitting on the art style for being kind of, like, weird. But then I heard nothing about it. I never heard anything about it. So I was just like, I didn't even, like, know, is it out? And it was, and it was like, by the time I checked this out again at the very beginning of the year, and this is when the season 2 was kind of wrapping up and the whole show was ending. And so I was like, might as well look into it. And honestly, the animation I don't think is that bad. This sort of, like, kind of 3D sort of shade, kind of cell shading kind of look of it, I think is fine. I don't really have an issue with that. But I just had the completely wrong, like, perception of the show. I thought it was going to be sort of like almost like an X-Wing or Rogue Squadron kind of show where it's like, let's follow like fighter pilots as they do stuff or whatever. And it's like, no, it's largely sort of just following, this crew that's on this sort of station on this water planet, at least for season 1. And it's just kind of not that interesting. And honestly, the characterization is not great either. I think the show is definitely noticeably made for like a younger audience. Because there's a lot of like, look at this quirky character, and especially the main character, Kaz. He's very much like the dunce, like kind of the dumbass. Like, the dumbass, but he has a heart of gold, and it's just like, yeah, okay. And, there's sort of the older mentor in Eager, who's like, fine, he's kind of standard. There's Tam, who I think has potential in terms of being a really interesting take on a certain, on something. Again, it's kind of spoiler to say, so I'm not going to say it, but basically, her background and how she views things is a very interesting view to have, and they could actually get to some really interesting sort of characterization with her, but they just kind of don't really do that. They sort of start it, but then they kind of don't commit all the way, and I think part of it just might be because, again, they view this as like kind of a younger kids show, so they can't really fully commit to this, so it's like, okay. Other characters are just kind of, again, alright. There's nothing really in it that's that great, but I will say this. People talk about the worst Star Wars character, and before it was probably mostly Jar Jar, but then recently people, Rose is the worst Star Wars character. No. The worst Star Wars character is Niku. I hate Niku in this show. Oh my god, he's so annoying. So Niku is really, really aggravating to just witness in this show. But besides that, I don't know. Everything's just kind of alright, kind of dull. Some of the stuff looks nice. That's it. So it's like, I guess neutral? I don't know. So I guess it's a 5. There's not really a reason to watch it, though. So I guess if you're really curious, you can check it out, but it's definitely not that great a recommendation for me. Another show that was released last year was the Carmen Sandiego show on Netflix. Again, another thing that I have no reference on for the earlier interpretations of the character. I've seen like basically I've seen kind of a split in terms of how people view this show online. People either like really like it, or they see it as like a betrayal to Carmen Sandiego because she's like an actual like good person now. She's like the hero of the story. I don't care, basically, as long as like the character of the show is interesting. I don't really care about that. It's fine. Honestly, that's my take on it. Like, I just think the show is fine. I have no real strong attachment to it whatsoever. It's sort of like, Big Hero 6 show and stuff like that, where it's just sort of, it exists, it works. Nothing too interesting. I do think it does suffer a bit from my end, and that, like, the show is clearly made for, again, younger kids, and so it does sort of, like, stop to have these, like, educational moments. I know that was part of the original show, but, like, it does feel kind of forced. And, like, the humor, again, is pretty clearly for, like, younger kids. So, the art style is nice. It does definitely look nice in terms of the, sort of the kind of children's book drawing kind of element of it. So it works well there. But in terms of actual, like, story characters, fine. 6 out of 10. Yeah, I know some people really like it, though, so maybe if you're curious, check it out. Maybe you'll like it, but no more than I do. But, I think it's just sort of fine. Something else, though, is that was released this year is a show called The Hollow. Now, this is an interesting... I will say that this show is a very interesting premise. The premise is basically 3 kids wake up in some sort of bunker with amnesia. They don't really remember anything. And they're trying to figure out sort of how to escape. And as they first kind of get out into the world, it seems like the world's almost like has these like paranormal things going on. It's super weird, like what the heck is happening? And there is this actually legitimate mystery here that is actually pretty compelling in terms of what actually is going on. So that actually works pretty well. The problem is the characters are just boring. Like, I don't know, there's just nothing really interesting about the characters whatsoever, and the animation is not that great. Now, the thing is, there is an argument that, like, there's a legitimate reason the animation isn't that great, that actually makes sense in terms of, like, the story of what's going on. But it does still look kind of weird. And honestly, it's not just the design. Like, there are moments where, for example, you see, like, a character, they're running, and they have this, like, very clear, it's like a run cycle. Like, think of, like, an older video game where someone's, like, has a very clear running animation, but then they stop, and their animation just sort of snaps into place, so they stop moving. It's like, it's a little bit janky. And again, there is an argument you could make the kind of a meta angle that actually makes sense that it's kind of janky, but I don't know. And then Season 2 then happened. It's a little bit better in terms of the characters being a little bit better and a little bit more focused on what's going on, but it's still not that great. So I guess it's ultimately positive in the end, just because, again, I think the mystery angle is done pretty well. So, okay, I'll give it a 6, but honestly, it's a pretty low 6. So I guess if you're really curious, you can look into it, but I don't know, I wouldn't really strongly recommend it that much. But something, on the other hand, something that sounds completely ridiculous and like it wouldn't really work is the Green Eggs and Ham show. And this is very interesting because, again, just on the top of things, this sounds completely ridiculous. How the heck do you make a show on Green Eggs and Ham? But it works. It works. And the thing is, of course, they have this, like, actual plot and stuff that's not, the book doesn't have a plot, really, So they have that. But again, it feels like it works within the story. The characters it definitely feels like they sort of took the actual story as very much like a baseline, and they just sort of pulled everything out of there. The characters are definitely from that framework, but they're expanded on quite a lot. And I think it works really well. Both characters of Sam and, well, Guy, which is his name, the grumpy dude from the story. I actually like both their characters. Sam was a little bit annoying at first, but, like, I got around to him, and I kind of got, how he develops the story. There's also some other characters, too, involved that kind of bring in that I think work quite well there, too. And the art style is just, it's great. The art style in the show is really, really great. They really capture this sort of Seuss style, and it's not just, like, the design of, like, the backgrounds and the colors, but also just the world design. It's just very weird. They're on, like, a train that all of a sudden randomly goes into, like, corkscrews and loops, and it's like, yeah, okay, that's totally Seuss, right? And so it works really well in that sense. It's also one of those shows that has a kind of a nice feeling to it. And I got really invested in this show. I am very curious to see how this continues, because it does end on a cliffhanger, but it's after a resolution. So it's almost like sort of, it's kind of like an after credits teaser, sort of. So it doesn't feel like, oh, we just kind of left off in the middle of nowhere. No, you did resolve something, but there is more to come, and it seems like they are working on more. So I'm very curious to see how this goes in terms of sort of a season 2. But yeah, for now, Green Ham, solid 8. It's good. Check it out. Something else that's also interesting in terms of concept, but on a completely other side of, not based on a kid's book, is Love, Death, and Robots. Now, I don't really know if, again, some of this is not, like, well, there's one episode that actually has, like, live-action people in it, but the whole premise of this, well, let me back up. The whole premise of this show is it's a bunch of shorts that are not connected plot-wise, that are all, they're adult-themed, in terms of the concepts they go through. And again, the animation styles are all different. Some of them are very kind of cartoony. There's some, like, kind of more anime-inspired ones. There's some, like, again, sort of stylized CG ones. There's some that kind of looks like how Spider-Verse looks. And there's some that it's, like, very realistic CGI as well. And I think overall it all works pretty well in that sense. And also because, again, it's sort of these all collection of short stories, just like with, again, Clone Wars and Adventure Time, what I talked about with those, you can sort of pick and kind of latch on to specific episodes, and if there's some that are not great, okay, that's fine. They don't really detract from the overall show that much. And there's a lot here. There's a lot of different things to pick at. I don't think there's anything in it that's, like, particularly profound or anything like that. I've heard some people describe it as, like, low-scale Black Mirror in terms of, like, the topics that are touched upon, which, like, kind of sounds like an insult, but, like, not really. Honestly, if you just approach the show for what it is, which is basically, like, an excuse to kind of have some interesting animation over some kind of weird sci-fi-ish stories, then I think you can enjoy yourself. It is, I will say, it is very much not safe for work. There's a reason that it's, an adult show. There's kind of a lot of sex scenes in here, which are, some of which are not really necessary, but, others are okay. And it's also pretty violent and stuff, so yeah, definitely, if you're squeamish, don't watch this. But there's definitely, I think there's probably at least an episode that someone can latch onto. In terms of my personal favorites, I don't remember the episode names, but I remember Three Robots. It's the second episode. Three robots kind of running around destroyed Earth. That's a fun episode. I like the character interaction there. The one with with China, the animated one with China and like the wolf spirit. Again, I don't remember the names of anything here. I watched this several months ago. That was a really, really good one. Beyond the Aquila Rift? Is that an episode? The one with, well, that episode. that one I like. That one's good. Also, I think it's the third episode. There is that kind of weird. It's the one where the woman, the dancer, sees like the guy murdering someone in like the building across the street. That episode, that's weird. That's a weird one, but in a good way. Although again, the whole like kind of sex angle of that is kind of odd. Anyway, but there are also some episodes that are not that great. Again, there's the military episode that was kind of like all right. There's like this kind of vampire episode that's sort of like, again, kind of all right. There's the episode with the arm, which I don't like that. I mean, that's definitely more stuff as a squicky thing, because that was just, ugh. But, you know, there's the Garbage Man episode. It's kind of okay. So again, it's a bit, you know, there's a bit of a range of quality, but overall, again, for what it is, I think it accomplishes what it sets out to do. And I am curious to see more of it, because I believe they're working on, there's going to be more of this too. So, I'm solid 8. Yeah, sure, I'm going to give it a solid 8. I think it overall works for what it needs to do. So, yeah. Okay, moving on. We have a show that's also kind of anime-inspired, Genlock. Now, this was made by Rooster Teeth, and if you know anything about what I think about their other anime-inspired show, being Ruby, I don't like Ruby. So I was a little bit had some trepidation for watching this, but I do think it's a lot better than Ruby. The characterization is better. The format of the show is just better. And the concept of this is that, like, basically humans can sort of interface with these sort of kind of mecha machines. So, you know, probably can remind you of a couple things there. And, you know, I don't think there's anything that's, like, super great about it. But definitely, it's another one of those that has potential for sure. I believe that, again, they've said they're going to continue to work on more of this. But there's some decent characters. Action's pretty good, actually, in the whole... It's another one of these sort of, like, 3D kind of art style similar to Star Wars Resistance. But I think it works better here with the action. And, you know, again, for what we have, it's good. Want to see more? But it's good. So, solid and kind of high 7? Sure, that works for that. Genlock gets his high 7. And last of these shows that just came out in the last couple years is Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn, actually, I think the first episode of Harley Quinn released at the end of November of 2019. So most of the episodes of Harley Quinn that have been released actually are from 2020. And I remember, like, hearing that this show was going to be a thing a few years ago and then completely forgetting about it. And then just happening to see, like, a clip somewhere. And I was like, oh, yeah, that show was a thing. And, like, so I had to check it out. And, like, I'd forgotten that, like, this show was supposed to be, like, kind of, you know, adult. And so when that first scene on the boat happens in episode 1, I was like, oh, yeah, that's the kind of show this was going to be. I forgot. So this is very much, again, another not safe for work show. It's real violent, real sweary. And I don't know, for me, like, the blood kind of stuff, the violence is so kind of over the top that it actually doesn't bother me. But that could definitely bother other people, so keep that in mind. But if you can get past that, I actually do think the show is really entertaining. I will say this, though. The trailer makes the show look bad. Like, it makes it look like it's a bunch of just like, oh, look, it's funny that we made Harley Quinn say fuck. And it's a lot of, you know, kind of gross out humor or stuff with just kind of bad jokes. And, like, it feels... the trailer does not do the show justice. It is a lot better. And I think the one-liners are not, like, the great part of the show. It's just the characters are just kind of real fun. They have a lot of weird quirks with them. King Shark, in particular, for example, is a really great character where he's just, you know, he's a violent, vicious shark, but most of the time he's just, like, a nice dude. And it's just, like... it's just a fun kind of, you know, balance of that. You have, Clayface is, like, this weird, like, you know, drama actor guy that's, like, way over the top, and it's just, like, okay, you know, a lot of fun with that. And, you know, the other characters just really enjoyable in that sense there. And I particularly Harley Quinn herself and also Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy is actually my favorite character of the show. I don't know, I think her kind of a bit more, she's the grounded one, which, plant grounded, haha. But, like, you know, I think she definitely works well with kind of the rest of the cast. She's actually my favorite character in the show, and I just think everyone's dynamic is really, really good. And it does also, as it continues, I feel like it builds on itself to get better and better. So even if like the individual episodes are not like always better than the last one, the overall feeling of everything and sort of the connection with the characters and what's going on, that builds throughout both seasons that we've seen. And this is another one that they've said that's going to continue, which I'm definitely glad that's going to happen. And I think overall, it is ultimately a pretty satisfying show to watch through in terms of, again, the journey of the story and characters. But yeah, just the trailer makes it look bad, but overall I think it's quite fun. I can see the humor not working for everyone. I am wondering, because it is very much sort of like millennial humor in terms of a lot of it, so I'm wondering, like, someone who, you know, is maybe, like, someone watching this 10 years from now, how would they feel about it? So that is something that could be potential issue. But I think overall it does work. It works. It's I thought it was really enjoyable. And honestly, because of how, especially the ending feels really satisfying and tying everything together. Well, again, the show isn't over, but at least for the 2 seasons, I think I am going to squeak this up to a 9. It's right at the bottom of 9. Like, for me, basically, as I was watching the show, it was a high 8 for pretty much all of it, and then once I got to the end, I was like, oh, I'm going to give it up to a 9. So, yeah, it's very close up there, but I really enjoyed it. Again, maybe not for everybody, but especially because of the violent part of it, but I thought it was really entertaining, really enjoyable, so that's definitely something for me. Okay, so now we can actually start talking about a couple shows that just came out in 2020. First of these that I'm going to talk about is The Owl House. Now, The Owl House, I've definitely heard as a spiritual successor to Gravity Falls, and it is. I believe the show creator, I don't remember her name, but I believe she's the significant other of Alex Hirsch, who is the creator of Gravity Falls. And also, Alex Hirsch provides the voice of one of the characters, actually 2 of the characters, in the show. So it definitely feels like sort of a spiritual successor in that sense. It is a bit more fantastical, because the premise is that you have, instead of, you know, some kids kind of living in this sort of weird, you know, town on Earth, you instead have this kid, Luce, who's living literally in, like, another world, basically, this sort of magical realm with, you know, witches and, you know, fairies and monsters and all that kind of stuff. And so it's a little bit more in terms of the fantastical elements of it, but I think it works. It also makes it sort of that it is different enough from Gravity Falls, even though you could tell that they're very similar. And the characters and the dialogue, again, they have that sort of Gravity Falls wit to them, where it's legitimately funny in terms of what's happening, even if it's not like strictly like, you know, one-liner jokes, but just the overall dialogue and the character interaction is funny. It's done well. So that works really well. There's definitely there's some great design, again, in terms of the world and the monsters and the creatures and all that kind of stuff. So that works really well in terms of the animation. I will say, it does feel like a season 1, where it does feel like it's set up and it's sort of getting familiar with the characters and the world and some few things that, like, are definitely going to be much more important and probably much more impactful later on. So it's not, I don't think it's great yet, but I think it definitely has potential to be great. And to be fair, like, you know, especially, well, Gravity Falls is a little bit different because it was only ran for 2 seasons, but I'm thinking, you know, a bunch of other shows where I've just seen where if I just saw season 1, you know, would I have thought they were, like, fantastic shows? No, probably not. But, like, I still think that, you know, this show absolutely is a really solid starting point, and it totally has potential to grow even further. So, with good animation, fun characters, definitely some great moments, great writing and dialogue, it gets a solid high 8 for me. But this could even go further, and could definitely be even a 9. Maybe a 10. I don't know if I go that far. But then again, if I just watched season 1 of She-Ra, I would not have thought that would be a 10. So we'll see. We'll see how this goes. I'm definitely curious to see how it continues. If you want more Gravity Falls kind of stuff in your life, definitely go ahead and check it out. Next up, though, we have Kipo and the Age of Wonderbeasts. This is a very interesting show just in terms of the look of it. You have this sort of post-apocalyptic environment, but it's very vibrant and colorful. And it has this, again, this sort of urban fantasy, not just, you know, in terms of what's going on, but also and the soundtrack is very hip-hop inspired, for example. And it creates a very interesting and unique feel to everything. Nothing else that I can think of really feels like this show in terms of just watching it and just getting the atmosphere of everything. So that works quite well. And I think that is just the best aspect of it. Just seeing just the weird stuff in the world. And especially in season 1, where you're following these characters just trying to kind of notice what's in the environment and what's in the world. Because again, you have all these sort of mutated animals and creatures that are, again, very strange, and just seeing what there is, what they've kind of put in this show, I think that's the best aspect of it. Once you get into the actual story and kind of what's going on, you have sort of an antagonist and that kind of stuff. It makes it a little bit more standard, but it's still good. So I can't really complain about that. In characters, overall, pretty good. I don't have anything in particular to point out. Kipo herself is one of those, definitely like, I'm super optimistic about everything, and, I managed to solve things because I'm, more friendly than other people. And, like, I could see people kind of getting a little annoyed at that, but I didn't mind it. I thought her personality was overall, it worked for what the show was going for, so I thought that worked pretty well. I will say that season 1 ends really abruptly, and like a, kind of out of nowhere, so, but season 2, just comes right after that, and it goes through and finishes up the plotline. Season 3, again, we actually got 3 seasons of this all in 1 year, which is kind of surprising, it's a little bit of a step down. The thing is, it's interesting is that you think for a lot of these kinds of shows that, like, as you go through the seasons, they get sort of, like, more and more intense. Season 3 feels like a bit of a step down in terms of intensity. Things feel like they're almost like a little bit of lower stakes. It's almost like more lighthearted, which is kind of surprising, because usually almost always it's like you start lighthearted, then you get serious, right? Whereas season 3 is the opposite, actually kind of got more lighthearted, which was interesting. And it does sort of, like, it's kind of a good ending in terms of, like, ending the show, but at the same time, it feels... rushed is not right the quite word. Instead, it feels like we kind of missed something, right? It feels like maybe season 3 should have been season 4, and we should have had a different season 3, sort of in the middle there. I don't know. I still like the show. It's definitely a good show. Again, definitely the art design and sort of the atmosphere and the vibe of everything is definitely the best thing about it. I know a bunch of other people who, really like this show, so I'm giving it a solid 8. But this is definitely something to check out. You might like it even more than I do. So, yeah. Another show that was released on Netflix earlier on is Glitch Techs. Now, I know that there is some weird behind-the-scenes drama with the show. Like, apparently Nickelodeon was, like, originally going to air it, but then they, like, canceled it. But, like, half the episodes are already made, but they just never aired them until eventually Netflix got the rights to it. It's in a really weird sort of limbo state. And so we did get 2 seasons on Netflix, but as far as I understand, those episodes were, like, kind of already done. And, like, pretty much everyone who actually did make the show is, like, now doing other things. So it seems very unlikely that we're actually going to get any more of the show, which is kind of disappointing, because honestly, the premise of this is basically, like, Men in Black, but it's, like, computer stuff. It's, like, computers instead of aliens. Okay, so you have video game characters and stuff like that, which is, like, it's not a bad idea. And there's definitely a lot of potential for that. But in terms of the series itself, it's another one that's kind of standard, I think. And it's mostly down to the characters. The characters walk this fine line of being, like, not quite too annoying. I think it's the best way to put it. Like, Miko especially is a character who I'm like, if you were just, like, 1 degree more, I would really not like you. But, like, you're not, so you're okay. I'm okay with you. So, that works. There's definitely a lot of, it's very energetic. There's a lot of reference humor and a lot of, like, video game puns, which gets pretty grating, I'll admit. So that's kind of one thing that does bring it down a bit. But that's something... Again, it's unlikely we're going to get any more of this show, which is a little bit, I don't know. I'm like, would I really kind of keep watching? I'm not sure, honestly. But I can't say I didn't enjoy my time watching it overall. So, low 7, I guess. I think that works best there. Again, I know there's other people who do like the show also even a good amount, so might as well check it out if you're curious. Just keep in mind that some of the dialogue can get a bit much. So, there's that. Another show, and now, since I didn't really get anywhere in regular show, you're probably thinking, why the heck would I watch Close Enough? But, I don't know, I decided to watch Close Enough. And, I don't know, I was just curious. I was curious, and maybe something a little bit more grounded, serious? I don't know, I don't know what it was, why I decided to watch Close Enough. And I think maybe it helps that, Close Enough is short at the moment. We have only a couple episodes. And whereas, there's tons of regular show episodes, so it's maybe, that was a little bit more daunting. And the thing is, again, this show, Close Enough, is not made for me, because Close Enough is made for sort of, like, older millennials. That definitely seems like sort of the target for this. It's basically, like, kind of people in their sort of low 30s trying to sort of, hang on to their youth still, while still getting on the fact that they're, becoming, like, supposedly responsible adults, kind of dealing with that. And again, I'm not quite there in terms of, where I am in my life. So there's that disconnect. But overall, I did at least understand a lot, I did relate to some things that were going on, and I did think, that there was definitely some funny stuff here. I will say, probably about like a third of the jokes in the show just suck. Like a third of the show is just really not funny, but like the other 2/3 is pretty funny. So I don't know, it's kind of this weird mix. And the thing is, a lot of the time, just really weird shit happens. And that could be kind of nice, because even if it's not, like, funny, it's just, like, kind of, it keeps you watching it, because it's just super weird. So there's that helps. I do think the art style is a little bit off-putting. I don't know, the regular show, Close Enough art style is kind of hit or miss for me. And so I don't know how other people would particularly like this, especially someone who's not, in this kind of demographic themselves. Overall, again, I did actually watch it. I did watch it all compared to, regular show which you just started. But I don't know. I guess kind of lower 7, probably also with this as well. Would I watch more? Maybe. Probably. I don't know. Maybe. And, if you're curious, I'd say check it out. But just be mindful that, again, I think probably about a third of the jokes just die really hard. So, yeah. And last of the new shows of 2020 that I watched, animated shows anyway, we have the Animaniacs Reboot. Now, again, I did not watch Animaniacs growing up. I know of it. I've seen clips of it, of course, but I did not watch the original show. And the thing is, like, this show is weird for me, because almost the other shows I've been to this before, where like with Clone Wars and stuff, where I said like, hey, if you were to average the rating of every single show, of every single episode of the show, the actual rating I would give the show would be higher than that. Basically, the show as a whole is better than the sum of its parts. But I almost feel like Animaniacs is the opposite of that. Because here's the thing, if you ask me about every single like sketch in the show, the vast majority of them I think are quite funny. I think they're quite good. Dialogue is good, characterization, well, I mean, they're kind of all tropes or whatever, that's sort of the point. But it's funny. I think most of the stuff is funny. But overall, I felt kind of disappointed. And I think it's mostly due to just lack of variety. And again, as someone who didn't watch the original show, I still knew that, like, they had a bunch of characters in the original show that they weren't using here. And there is an episode that kind of addresses that, which I think is, like, really clever, and I thought that was funny. But it does also just bring more attention to it, where it's like, yeah, why didn't they use all these other characters? And apparently I've seen some, like, interviews and stuff where they've said that, like, they specifically wanted to make sure they got, like, the main cast right, and so then they could focus on the other characters later, which, yeah, okay, I guess that makes sense. But I don't know, it does feel like something's lacking here. And again, I did not watch the original show, so I wouldn't have any reason to assume there should be more, but it feels like there should be more, right? The stuff of the Warners, I think, is largely pretty good. The Picking of the Brain stuff, honestly, I don't think is a little bit of a step down. It's not bad, but I don't know, I just felt like, again, I felt like I was missing variety. I felt like I needed some other stuff to happen that would actually engage me more and give me some more variety in terms of what's going on, than just the Picking of the Brain stuff all the time. So, yeah, overall, I'm kind of in a weird spot for this, because, like, if you were to just, like, have me look at, like, each of the sketches, I would like them quite a lot. But again, after I watched the show, I was kind of left with just thinking, like, that was it? So, I don't know. Like, it's hard to really rate this. I guess it was ultimately positive, I guess. I don't know. 7. I guess that's my default if I think something's positive, right? I don't know. Maybe a 6, 7, 7. Low 7. I'm going to give it a low 7. I don't know. This could totally change in the year. Will I watch more? If they add new characters, yes. I will definitely, or at least, bring back, whatever. If they have more variety, I will watch more. But as is, I don't know. I really don't know. So, yeah. This is another show where I'm curious, like, how well this will age, in 10 years or so. People complain about, oh, this show's political now or something, but, like, no, I've seen clips of the original show, and yeah, it's very political then too, so, I don't know. Overall, yeah, 7, I guess, works in that case there. So, those are all the Western animated shows that I have seen this year. But I've also seen a fair amount of anime this year. And I actually have not watched a ton of anime in the past. I think I've seen less than 10 anime shows before 2020, and I think I've, like, doubled that, or more just in 2020 alone. So I've actually watched a fair amount of anime, and largely it's because of Netflix. Netflix and anime is actually, like, helped me kind of watch some random things I would have seen otherwise. But just to continue on from what I did before, I am continuing on with My Hero Academia Season 4. I said that basically I thought My Hero Academia is decent. It's enjoyable. There's definitely some pretty good stuff in there. The sort of, I think it was the second half, or it was the first half of Season 3, I think. The thing with All for One, was that his name? I think, anyway, that was probably the best part of the show. But even then, I had more thoughts on it sort of in the 2019 retrospective. But basically, I think Season 4 is just more of the same. It's more decent stuff. There's not really nothing that I think is that great overall in terms of everything. But, nothing either way. I don't know. It's because let's see, it was from 2019 there was the episode with the guy, I don't remember what his name's, only it's over a year ago, with the girl Aerie, that whole thing, which that was definitely very intense, a lot more dramatic. Then the sort of second half of the season was on this sort of school festival, which was nice, as it was more of a kind of a chiller arc, and it got to focus a bit more on some of the other characters. That's one thing that, again, I have liked, how more recently there's been a bit more focus on some of the other characters, and I want to see more of that. But yeah, I like kind of having that more low stakes sort of arc every now and then. Though honestly, the gentle criminal stuff is like kind of wrong. Like the fact that basically there's this like kid who seems to be like in love with him is like not okay. So I don't really know who like who came up. I mean, I guess the original writer of the manga did, but like that was not comfortable. I was not okay with what was going on there. And honestly, I felt like it was just kind of unneeded. It was like, here's some unnecessary drama for this stuff, which should just be kind of nice character development. So, I wasn't really a fan of that. But overall, it works. Last two episodes, I think, are definitely kind of interesting in terms of maybe setting up things for the future. But I don't know. I'm not, again, definitely not a huge fan of the series. Definitely not following any of the fandom stuff. I'm just kind of, I think it's fine and decent. So, 7, sure. My Season 4 continues to be a 7, just like how I think everything else continues to be a 7 with the show. Anyway, new shows that I saw this year. The first one I'm going to talk about is Dr. Stone. Now, I'd heard several people talk about the show like it was really, really good. And, it seems like something I would really like, too, as a physics teacher, where the premise is already really interesting, where you have suddenly, for some reason, humanity seems to have all, like, turned to stone. And then, like, thousands of years later, some of them start sort of waking up, basically, and sort of breaking out of their stone, and then the main guy, Senku in particular, is trying to sort of rebuild human civilization based on his, like, science knowledge. And it's definitely contrived in the sense that, like, how would one kid really know all this stuff and be able to do all this stuff? That's, but okay, fine, protagonist, okay, whatever. So that's not really an issue. But the thing that's kind of weird is the science aspect of it. It didn't grab me as much as I thought it would, and I don't really know why. But I don't know, because I've seen a lot of people say, like, oh, the science stuff is, like, so great and it's so interesting seeing how they pull all this stuff together. But, like, I don't know, I don't dislike it. But it was like, okay, so they do that. All right, I don't know, I don't find it as impressive as other people do. I don't really know what the issue is. In terms of, like, the characters and the plot, again, it works, it's decent, there's nothing really that special about anything. I will say that, like, the beginning of the show kind of sets up that, like, who you think the main characters would be, but then, like, after just, I don't know, 6, 7 episodes or something, those characters, many of those characters, are almost never seen again. So it's, like, it's really weird, where it's, like, here is the main group. Oh, just kidding, like, that's not true. So it's kind of weird how that happens. I don't know, I'm curious, I guess I'm curious to see how things continue. I don't love it. I'm a little bit mixed, but it is ultimately positive. I'm going to give it a 7, kind of a mixed mid-low 7 for now, but definitely could get better in my eyes. Again, most people that I've seen like it more than I do, so if you're curious about it, I'd say check it out, but that's my opinion on it anyway. Something else that we talked about early in the year for a show Sunday is, of course, Aggretsuko. So I'll be pretty brief for this because I mentioned what I thought before. But I do think it's very interesting having this sort of, dichotomy of this very, very cute art style that goes into some legitimate, like, societal issues and how these characters sort of handle, modern life. And I think it does handle things overall pretty well. I like how, Retsuko doesn't always make the best decisions about everything, but, like, again, it doesn't. The show does not present it that way. The show presents it as this is Retsuko's decision, not it's the right decision, right? So that's interesting in how it's handled there. I do like how they explicitly sort of call out, capitalism as the fault in like a lot of these issues, because a lot of shows will sort of dance around and be like, oh, it's who knows why? Well, working sucks, haha. But here it's like, oh yeah, no, people are kind of being worked to death through late stage capitalism, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's kind of nice to have someone actually just say it. So that's good. Again, characters are fun, art style is fun. I think the humor is overall pretty good. That's it. Season 3 kind of ends on like kind of a dark moment where it's like, okay, so that was something. And that is pretty powerful emotionally. Definitely hope there's more. Definitely curious to see more. Solid 8 out of 10. I like the show quite a bit. I think it works really well. Now, another show that was on Netflix that I'd heard a lot of praise for was Carole Tuesday. And, I heard, of course, this is like a musical anime, so I was like, okay, it's not my thing. But again, I heard a lot of praise for this, so I was like, okay, it must have something in it that's sort of more than that, right? And it doesn't really. Like, the thing is, this is a musical anime, and there are tropes associated with that the show does follow, right? You have sort of the small independent, we make music from the heart, not like these studio people, and it's like, it's that kind of thing, and it's like, all right, okay, it's kind of goes through those cliches. Granted, it does it well. Like, the characters are good. The music's not really my thing, but, it's not bad. It is kind of weird where it's one of those, like, somehow their music is the one that, like, everyone gets obsessed over when, like, again, it's, it's not bad, but, like, it's not particularly interesting. I don't know. Again, it's not my music, so not my kind of music, so I can't really judge, but, I don't know. Again, the character actions are pretty good. Again, for fitting into the trope of musical anime, and not really deviating from it that much, it does it quite well. And again, there's sort of one of those things where it's like, oh, we saved the world with our music. And again, it's kind of cheesy in that sense there. So don't think that you're, like, secretly getting, like, Madoka or something, some deconstruction of the genre. You're not getting that. But it's good, and from what it does and kind of what it goes through. I will say, just sort of like how I'm glad that Aggretsuko, like, kind of specifically sort of calls out late-stage capitalism, they get actually explicitly political here, too, as well. Specifically, it's about, like, immigrants and refugees, and they very clearly say, like, no, we are on this side of the issue. And I like that, because, again, it's another one of those things where it's, like, these kind of shows, especially the sort of musical thing, they tend to get into this, like, oh, there's so much conflict in the world, and people need to get along and love each other, and it's very much sort of like a neutral whatever stance, but this is very clear, like, no, we are on this side of the issue, we think this is right. And it's like, that's refreshing. It's like, oh, thank you for actually taking a stand and actually saying something explicit instead of just, random, happy nonsense. So, yeah, that definitely helps. I will say the ending of the show is, like, kind of, I thought I expected a little bit more. Again, I don't know, maybe the buildup of it, I thought there'd be a little bit more happening and, like, some sort of big reveal about something, but it's kind of not that big. So I could see some people really liking that aspect of it. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it. But overall, yeah, it's a good show. It's an 8. I think 8 works. I can see how some people, especially if they do get into this music and they could get more into the genre, that they could like this a lot. I'm not there, but for what it is, I appreciate it, and I am glad I saw it. So, yeah, that's something. On the other hand, Beastars. This is, of course, the furry anime, and oh my gosh, it's just Anime's Utopia. And, like, yeah, I mean, it is Anime's Utopia, but, like, it is different. It's different in how, what's the focus? Because Zootopia focuses specifically on the plot of what's going on and sort of the society as a whole, and how, societal is organized between, like, the predators and the prey and that kind of stuff. This is much more personal. It's more so, how do these specific characters interact in this society? And I think it's very interesting in that sense there. The main character, Lelouch, as this wolf, he is this predator, but is shy, and he's kind of a coward, and how they sort of work with that is good. You have Louis, the deer, who is a prey animal, but he's very determined, thinks that, like, it's him versus the world, and then you have Haru, who is, this small rabbit, who, it's interesting because, like, she's a kind of character who I could totally see in most other shows being played as, like, either a villain or as at least, like, kind of a bad person, because her whole thing is that she's very like sexually free. And it's not very common, even especially in Japanese stuff, where like that's seen as in like a positive way, because they really show it as like, yeah, this is her decision of how to live her life, and it's like, okay, yeah, like that's true. We should have more like, you know, sex positivity in like media like that. So it is nice about that and how that works. And again, her dynamic, especially with Legoshi, is very interesting because again, you have the predator-prey dynamic, and of course the whole the sexual tension dynamic too, and how that sort of plays off of each other is very interesting. And so I think that works really well. And this is another one of those also where like I want to see more of this, right? For what we have now, I'm very intrigued. I think it's good, but I think this could get very good and very interesting if once we get more involved. And again, I believe I think I looked this up recently, that season 2, at least internationally, I think is going to be in July. So definitely looking forward to this more. This, to me, this is like, just like how I said Harley Quinn was like just squeaked into a 9, I think Beastars is just out of a 9. I'd give it an 8, very, very high 8, but this could absolutely become a 9 in future seasons by what happens. So even if, again, don't get turned off by, oh, it's the furry anime. Like, I would really check this out. I think this could be very interesting to a lot of people. And speaking of, you know, animal sort of based anime, we have BNA, or Brand New Animal. And this to me feels like you take like Beastars and sort of mix it with like Kipo a little bit in terms of like, again, sort of the characters being, you know, a bit more kind of upbeat, and then also having it be in this sort of modern city, and you get BNA. And I've heard that like this show was kind of rushed, and that like there were going to be like twice as many episodes or something, and it does kind of feel that way. It feels like, for example, we saw like the beginning of a show and like the end of a show, but we kind of missed the middle of the show, so it does kind of feel that way. But overall, I think the episodes are overall pretty fun. The characters are pretty good. Michiru as the main character is just sort of a fun personality to be around, so I think that works well there. It's kind of funny because, like, you know, a lot of times people criticize filler episodes, right? And the thing is, filler to me just means it's an episode that doesn't further the overall story. That doesn't mean filler is bad, and I think this is a good example of that, because honestly, like, there's this like baseball episode that is a filler episode, but I think it's probably my favorite episode because it's just sort of fun stuff happening, and like that works really well in that sense. It's enjoyable, so it's good there. But you know, there's not too much to say here. I think it's enjoyable. I'd be curious to see more. I don't know if there's going to be more, though, which is kind of an issue. But I would like to see more. Fun characters, fun setting, fun story. Yeah. I'm going to give it, middle of the road, lower 8, maybe. Kind of around that range. You know, definitely not, probably around Carole Tuesday range. Again, I'm a bit more into the genre and sort of specifically what's happening in this story, but it does feel like it's not executed as well as Carole Tuesday, so it's kind of comparable, but, yeah. Now, some other another anime that I happened to find on Netflix that just sort of, I think almost nobody's actually seen, is one called Levius. Now, Levius, the best way to describe this is steampunk boxing, which is very odd, but that's, you know, how the best way I can describe it. And the thing is, it's weird because, like, the premise is interesting just off of that, and sort of the alternate, you know, universe where people have these, like, sort of steampunk kind of robotic, quote-unquote, arms to box each other. It could definitely be interesting. And, like, the thing is, this sort of story really works based on, like, the characters and also just sort of the tension of the story. And the characters are kind of flat. Especially, like, honestly, I will say this. I watched all of these anime dubbed because I'm a filthy casual and it's kind of hard for me to read subtitles. And I've had no problems any dubs of anything until this one. And the dub, it's not so much the voices, but I think it's more like just the mannerisms for how the characters speak. And I'm sure in Japanese it probably makes more sense, but how that translated to English, it sounds a little awkward. For example, I forgot her name, but sort of the girl character who's in here, she keeps calling sort of the mentor guy like a hairy pig, and it's like she keeps using those exact same words like all the time. It comes off as kind of weird. And also specifically, you know, there's sort of the whole joke about how the anime in dubs, there's all of these like like all those noises, and like this especially I noticed has a lot of those noises. So it's, again, the dub is a little weird, so there's that. But like, you know, and so it was like, okay, the characters kind of all right, so then what about the fights themselves? And at first, some of the fights early on seemed like too fast. Like the editing was too fast. I couldn't really follow what was going on. And like, again, it was overall pretty good, but it was like kind of missing like sort of the one extra thing that would make it really good. So it was like it was pretty good. I was intrigued, and the world was interesting, but like it wasn't really fully gone into. So I was like, I want to give this a good rating, but like I mean, I've been like, it's like kind of holding things back a little bit. But then we get to the last 3 episodes, and the last 3 episodes are like noticeably better than the other episodes. They have like great tension. There's this excellent tension in the last 3 episodes. And I did actually really get sucked into like what was going on in those last 3 episodes. Again, I wish the whole show was like that. But just those last 3 episodes alone, I'm going to actually bump this up just barely to an 8 because of those last 3 episodes. And it's kind of frustrating though, because I have a feeling this isn't going to continue, because as far as I can tell, there's been no, info about like a second season or anything. Probably because it wasn't that popular, I would imagine. Which sucks, because again, those last 3 episodes were really good, and again, you still have the world. There's definitely more history to this world that I want to see more of, and also there's definitely a setup for more things happening at the end of season 1. So I would like to see more, especially if it continues off with the tension and stuff from the end of season 1. I just don't think it's there. So yeah, just squeaking into an 8 for now. But so if you're curious, at least for steampunk boxing that has, again, legitimately very good last 3 episodes, then go ahead and check it out. Another anime that I also happened to see on Netflix that also is probably not super popular and probably isn't going to continue was Cannon Busters. And it is somewhat similar to Levius in the sense that it has a kind of a standard sort of characters and plot, but where Levius, it's sort of, again, the last 3 episodes sort of propelled up top. This is better in the sense that like just the environment is just weird. It's this weird, again, sort of alternate kind of history where like there's robots, but it's also like kind of Old West, and also there's like kind of Arabian stuff. It's this very weird mix of designs that somehow still works, and it's just very trippy to look at sort of what's going on the screen a lot of the time. The writing and characters are a little bit hit or miss, like in terms of the dialogue and stuff. Some of it comes off as annoying, some of it is, funny and interesting. It's a bit of a mix. It also is definitely helps that just weird shit happens, so that helps a lot. There's a lot of very high energy things going on. You definitely kind of can get sucked into just all the energy of things going on around you. The story is... It is what it is. I don't think this is another one that probably won't continue, which it definitely has potential to. If you just want to see some weird shit happening for, a couple hours, might as well check it out. I'm also going to give it a very low 8, sort of right on the edge of that. But, yeah, maybe worth checking out in that sense. Largely just sort of style over substance, but, sometimes you need that. And then we have Dorohedoro. And this show is completely insane. I mean, just watch the opening. It's completely absurd. It's really violent and gruesome. Like, I knew it was going into this, and I was still like, oh, that's more than I thought. So, that's something. And I think the characters are a little bit more fleshed out than the last 2 shows I've talked about. So, I don't know. I don't think there's too much to say here, because it's just really weird. Really weird, really trippy, just a lot of weird shit happening that also has a lot of gruesome shit happening. So... I don't know. I'm also gonna give it kind of a low 8. This step, a small step higher than the previous 2. But if you want to just see some weird shit that's also pretty violent, I guess you can look into it. I don't know if there's gonna be more of this one, but oh boy, it's definitely something. So okay, all of that was the sort of random stuff I ended up finding on Netflix. However, these last few things here were things that I was specifically told to see. First one of these is Death Parade. Now, I was actually told to see this by one of my fellow colleagues, and I'll be honest, I came into the show kind of wanting to not like it, because Evan, if you're out there listening to this, he kept pestering me about this show, kind of on and off, saying like, hey, you should watch this, hey, you should watch this, I think it's really, really good, you should watch this. Now, finally, I was like, all right, fine, Evan, I'll watch your stupid show. And so I came into it with like kind of a chip on my shoulder, and... it's really good. Death Parade is really good. Damn it, Evan's right. So, yeah. The premise of this is very odd. Basically, I don't even really want to say anything about the premise. The thing is, if you watch like the opening of the show, it looks really like exciting and fun, and like there's all these weird characters, all these quirky adventures, and it's like, no, this show is very somber, very serious, and emotional. and especially the last few episodes, it's like, ooh boy. So yeah, the opening is a lie. This gets really sad, and um, it's how it presents its story is very interesting because you know you're sort of learning what's actually going on with the characters in terms of the environment and everything. So it does work really well in that sense in terms of this mystery. Again, you want to know more about the characters. You want to see what happens, particularly to sort of this main girl that you're following, who's in this world, but you don't, know what her deal is and why she's there. So, meanwhile, you have Deckham, who is this sort of, super ultra serious guy who, like, doesn't seem to have any emotion, and, like, what's his deal, as well as all the other people around. There's a lot of stuff going on, and it's very dense, but it works in a very good way. Basically, what you're having is it's about judging people based on their lives, and sort of, do they deserve, again, it's sort of, it's not heaven and hell, but it's sort of that idea. And it's interesting because the show makes the decisions, but I think it does leave it pretty open as to whether or not they're the right decisions, and I think that also is really interesting in that sense, too. So, you have that, and also, again, you have legitimately strong emotions as well, and it just works really well. It works really well. It's a 9. This show is a 9. It does things really, really well. If you want to be sad, watch the show. I think it actually is all on YouTube, which is actually kind of funny. Well, I know it's dubbed and dubbed and subbed, I believe, are actually both on YouTube, so you can go watch those, I guess. Definitely check it out. But another anime that someone wanted me to check out, and this was specifically Julie wanted me to check this out, is Neon Genesis Evangelion. Now, this, of course, is very, very famous for being, one of those anime that, like, people say is a classic and all that great stuff. And the thing is, this anime was made in the 90s, and it feels like it was made in the 90s. And I don't mean just in terms of, like, the animation quality and stuff like that, but I mean in terms of, like, the characterizations and, like, the dialogue and certain scenes. Like, this show is unnecessarily horny. It really is. In, like, there's several scenes where, like, you have a woman talking and about something, and, like, while she's talking about something, she just happens to be, like, undressing herself, like, or I guess putting on a clothes or whatever, like, half on screen. It's like, you didn't have to do it like that, you know what I mean? So, like, there's a lot of moments like that where it's just, like, I don't mind fan service, but, like, there should be some point to it. Like, there really isn't for a lot of the time, which is kind of eh. And, I should mention, I did watch the Netflix dub of this, and I have heard people complain that, like, Netflix sort of messed up the dub. I don't really have any basis for this. Again, the one thing I know is that for some reason they call everyone, like, for example, Shinji is, like, the third children, and, like, Asuka is the second children. And it's like, should they be, like, third child and second child? So, like, I don't know why that's a thing, but, like, besides that, there's nothing in it that I particularly notice is particularly bad. But, there's that. In terms of other characters, again, like, Shinji, I've heard a lot of talk about how Shinji is, like, kind of really aggravating to deal with, and, like, he is, but I didn't hate him. I did feel like I kind of understood where he was coming from, at least most of the time. So, that was something. But, I don't know, basically it wasn't, it didn't bother me as much as it potentially could have been. And so what kept me going was, like, sort of the overall the story of what was going on. I was curious about that. And, despite kind of weird things about some of the character stuff and other things, I was like, okay, it's 90 anime, I have to keep that in mind, I'll go through the story, and I'm curious to see how things are going. So I was overall positive on it going in to the last 2 episodes. And especially the episodes right before the ending with, I don't remember his name, but the 5th child. That, I think, was actually probably the best part of the show in terms of the characterization with Shinji and stuff. That was good. But the last 2 episodes, I did not like the last 2 episodes. I don't like them at all. And I have heard, people say that, like, it's because of budget cuts or something, so they had to do this sort of weird, sort of trippy stuff. And the thing is, like, I've also read that, like, that's strictly not true, and that the people creating this actually did specifically mean to do it that way, anyway. And so that's not my problem. My problem is that it seems to come out of nowhere. It doesn't resolve the actual story, and it just feels like meaningless philosophizing. Which, like, I don't have a problem with that inherently, but, like, wrap up the story, please. Like, I don't just leave the story there with it not ended. And there is this like character introspection, which like could be interesting, but it doesn't resolve. It's mostly just characters like complaining about how they hate certain aspects of themselves, and like Shinji gets like a bit of resolution from that, but the others don't. So it just, I was so unsatisfied with the ending of this. I was just like, that like ruined my entire enjoyment of the whole show. I was like, man, I was totally willing to like be cool with this despite the issues I had, and that just killed it for me. But then I was like, everyone, okay, look, but there's this End of Evangelion movie. Go watch that. It's an actual climax or whatever. So I'm like, okay, I'll watch the End of Evangelion. And it is an actual end of the story. Okay, so that's true. It does have that. There's a pretty nice action scene. I will say the action actually in the actual show is kind of not that good. I don't know. Like, I was kind of disappointed. I thought it would be a lot better. But the End of Evangelion, that fight with Asuka or whatever, that's pretty good. So that's good. And stuff. But actually, Shinji annoyed me more in End of Evangelion than he did in the show. Weirdly enough. So that was something, especially because at that point, it's like, bro, you've done all of this before. Like, why is now? Anyway, I don't want to get into that tangent. But, you know, it's something, there is at least more of a climax with what's going on. Visually, it's weird as hell, like in a good way. So that's something. But at the same time, the weird as hell nature, like, it, even though there is a climax, I still feel like I'm missing something in terms of actually understanding what's going on. I know probably there's people who really like the fact that, it's like an ending that sort of opens your interpretation of what exactly happened. But like, honestly, I kind of don't like that. I really don't. I like things that take a stand and say like, no, this is what happened. And we're, and it, especially in the ending of the show, that stuff came off as lazy to me, because it's like you're making up all this vague philosophical stuff and you're not actually like answering the questions of the show. You're not taking a stand. You're basically just complaining about all this stuff, and that's it. And like, I know that other people do not feel this way at all. So I'm just saying that this is how I felt about it. And so it's like, if I just watched up to like the third to last episode and then watched End of Evangelion, I'm trying to think, like, again, the ending, I still probably would have some issues with it, and I have some issues with it previously as well. But I think I ultimately would have given it a positive rating. But those last two episodes of the show, they really killed it for me. And so, but again, there are some good things to the show as well that I did like. So, the thing is, overall, my opinion of the show is overall negative, largely because of those last two episodes. So, I can't give it higher than a 5. I can't even give it a 5 because, again, I don't feel neutral about it. So, I'm giving Evangelion a 4. And I know there's going to be people who think I'm insane that I would do that. But, yeah, it didn't do it for me. It didn't do it for me. There's some things that I liked, but other things I really did not. And that really, really bothered me in some ways. So, yeah. Meanwhile, Julie also wanted me to watch Soul Eater. I watched the first 6 episodes, and I was like, I don't want to keep watching this. So, I didn't watch any more of Soul Eater. I don't know, characters I just found to be kind of, some of them are kind of annoying. I didn't hate it, but I had no desire to keep going. So, sorry, Julie. Sure you'll find something for me to watch that I'll like, but, but in the meantime, while I was, in the middle of the year, I also noticed that Code Geass was on Netflix. Now, I've watched Code Geass, before. It was actually the second anime I ever saw, and in fact, I would say it's my favorite anime. I really like Code Geass. And so, I'm actually rewatching it on Netflix. I think I actually liked it even more, because a lot of the more political stuff and some of the more discussions there, I actually got more into. So, do I think the show is perfect? No, like, the sort of Akasha stuff I think is a little bit too kind of vague and weird in terms of how exactly, what exactly is going on. So there's that, but like, overall, I think the show is really, really good. A lot of great characters, and the ending is phenomenal. I love the ending of Code Geass. I love it so much. So there's that. However, there are also something that I'd known that for several years, that they were making a sort of spin-off called Akito the Exiled. The thing is, I didn't realize that actually came out until like just this year. So I actually decided to watch it this year. I was like, oh, okay, let's actually see how this goes. So, in case you don't know, this is focusing on, some different characters in Europe, in the European Union. And that, it's in the same world. And the interesting thing about this is that the animation, particularly for the nightmare frames, it's that sort of 3D CGI sort of style, like in like in Beastars and stuff. And I think it actually helps makes the spin-off stand out a bit from the original show, because the action in here is different. It feels different. It's a lot more sort of fluid and quick, and I think it helps make it stand out. I'm not sure which one I like more in terms of the original kind of show's sort of 2D fight scenes between the nightmare frames and versus here, but it definitely makes it different. It's not the same, and especially how like their nightmare frames kind of have this like sort of spider walk with them or whatever. It's different, and so I appreciate that it's this different sense. The characterization and like the main conflict and stuff is overall pretty good. I don't have any super strong connection with anyone here. Like, there's no one like Lelouch who I really attached onto really strongly. But overall, it's done pretty well. I think the overall sort of how Geass is handled here is also interesting, because it is very different from the original show, which helps as well. And that part of the show, I think, is also done quite well. But that said, like, the main issue is that this is, I think it's 5 or 6 episodes that are like an hour long or something. And I think it's an awkward amount of time, because I feel like this would either be better either as like a 2-hour movie or as like a full like 25, 26 episodes show. Because you end up with the sort of main story that's quite good and main character conflict that's quite good, but you have some side stuff that kind of comes up here and there that feels really unnecessary and that it doesn't tie into anything. So either cut that out or flesh it out and have more of it and have like a reason for it to exist. You can't kind of have this middle ground, doesn't really work. So that's kind of my main issue about it. Or kind of one or the other, but overall, it's definitely not as good as the original show, but it is worth seeing if you're curious. So I would say that I'd say high 7. I think that's the best way of putting it. Again, if the some of the sort of side stuff was either again done better or just not in it, then it could probably be an 8. But I'm gonna give it a high 7 because of that. So still good, still worth checking out if you're curious. Although, of course, definitely check out the original Code Geass first as well. Now, something else I didn't know about at all about Code Geass was that they were sort of like remaking Code Geass in terms of these like anime movies. Now, I didn't watch any of those because any of the remake movies because I just watched the original show, and from some stuff I saw online, basically everyone was saying like, yeah, I mean, it's good, but like the original show is better, so like, okay, might as well just, what's the point? However, they made a sequel movie specifically as sequels to the remake movies. So this is, Code Geass Lelouch the Resurrection as a sequel to the Code Geass remake movies. So the thing is, you don't have to, if you just watch the original show and then watch Resurrection, it works. There is something, for example, there are some characters who like, there's a character who dies in the show who does not die in the remake movies, so therefore they're in Resurrection, so that's, there's some stuff like that. But overall, it does work, in that sense, so there's not really an issue. And the thing is, like, I have an inherent problem with this existing, because, again, just having this existing in the first place, it automatically sort of ruins the ending of the show, which, again, is one of my favorite moments of anything ever. So, that's automatically a problem. But, if you were going to make a sequel to Code Geass, this does work pretty well, and, it helps that it's not, just like how Akito the Exiled didn't feel like, sort of a repeat of the main series, even though this has, most of the main cast, it doesn't either, because again, they handle things a bit differently. The art style with the nightmare frames is back to how it was in the original show, so it's the 2D again, but just largely it's the Geass, right? How the Geass works is different. It's new. It feels different. And also, they don't do the thing where it's like, oh, you thought like, the plot was resolved at the end of the show. Too bad. There's actually, they missed a thing and there's this bigger issue now. No, it's very clear that this is a side thing that's separate from the main thing of the show. So you could just ignore this film and just look at the show by itself, and that's totally fine, right? And so I think it works in that sense very well. And again, the Geass, how it's used, is unique and different, and that helps there. Also, I'll be honest, it just is nice seeing these characters again. It is nice. It's nice seeing them again, seeing them hang out, seeing some kind of different combinations of characters that you didn't really see in the main show. I think it works really well there. So that works. And again, despite the fact that, again, the inherent problem of this ruining the ending of the show, the ending of the, Resurrection itself is nice, right? And, you know, it's definitely not as good as the show, but it is a nice ending. And it makes me kind of curious, like, because again, the ending of Resurrection sort of sets up that they could have, you know, even more movies. So, like, are they going to do that? I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but like, it's something at least. So I don't hate it. If this was like by itself, I would like it a decent amount. And if this story was somehow incorporated into like the main Code Geass show, and you know, like wasn't actually like, you know, after the end of the show, I probably would like this a good amount. But again, it inherently does screw up the ending of the show, so I can't justify giving it better than a 7. I just can't. I just can't do it. So yeah, that's something. But so if you were like me and you were just like, oh, they made a sequel, oh, that kind of ruins the ending, I guess you could check it out. Just keep in mind of what I feel about it in that sense. For what it is, a sequel to Code Geass, it's pretty good. So that's the best I can say about that. And then we have one of the most famous anime from the last 10 years, Attack on Titan. Now, I'd heard, back when this was, in its heyday, I'd heard just constant praise about Attack on Titan, that it was so great and wonderful and all this kind of stuff. And then I feel like it sort of dropped off the radar a bit, and I just didn't really hear very much about it. So, I was like, okay, maybe it's over or something. So I decided to look into it, and again, I saw that, season 4 just started airing, like a week ago or so. But at the time when I was watching these, more in the summer, that, okay, there's been 3 seasons, season 4 is going to be made, and I was like, oh, what the hell, I might as well look into this. And I told some friends, saying, hey, I'm going to actually watch Attack on Titan, and their responses was all, oh, okay. And I'm like, wait, Attack on Titan's bad? What? So, like, and all of a sudden, now I'm hearing all this stuff about how there's, like, problems with Attack on Titan, and, like, so I came into this not really knowing what to expect. I heard both sides, basically. I thought that it was, very heavily praised, but then I have friends who are saying that it's not great. I've seen people who think that, like, the first season is good, but the later seasons are not. I've seen the opposite, where it's the first season's not that great, but the later seasons are great. So I had no idea coming into this really what to think about it. And the thing is, from the beginning, I immediately thought that this could be a very, very good show for being a deconstruction of war. Because one of the things that they show very early on is that, like, they have people dying, like, a lot of people dying very quickly. Characters you thought would be important end up dying. And that's good from early on. And I was like, oh, are they going to do the whole thing where, like, because they could really break this down, because, like, the military, it really expects them to, like, everyone to be their own hero, right? And it's like, not everyone could be a hero, right? So when they have these characters who, like, you thought were going to be main characters dying, like, very early, it's like, oh, are they actually sort of playing into this thing where, like, not everyone can be a hero, and the military sort of often will, like, send people out just to die. Like, this could be really interesting, and that's kind of deconstruction of war, but then they don't do that. And instead they end up with characters, they do pull off the hero thing, where it's like, the character sort of pulls thing out of their ass that saves the day. And it's like, oh, okay. And, that sort of ruins that whole framework. And if anything, like, the characters themselves, honestly, are not that interesting. Like, really at all. I feel like they could be interesting if you put them in interesting situations that really challenge their preconceived notions, but that doesn't happen. It feels like they start to, but then they pull back and say, oh no, they did figure it out. They did save the day. And it's just like, well, then you're not actually testing them. You just start to test them, but then you pull away at the last second. And it becomes really frustrating, because I see the potential here. I see some very interesting choices they could make, but then they just don't make them. And it makes it really, really frustrating. And it's weird because, like, the animation is also kind of inconsistent. There are moments where it's, very impressive. There are other moments where it comes off as really lazy. Like, there's definitely moments where they just hold, like, a still image that where, like, they have no reason to hold the still image, and it's like, so you just didn't feel like animating that scene, I guess. Okay, so I'm sure that there's, like, maybe a budget issue, because again, there is stuff that is very impressive, so it's a bit all over the place, but I don't know. And the thing, I'm gonna say something that I'm probably immediately going to have some people, like, think I'm crazy, but this show feels like conservative propaganda. And here's what I mean by that. Again, it's how they handle the military, right? Because the military is always shown as, like, that they know what's best. Particularly, the people of the military know what's best. I've noticed something interesting where, when you have conservative and liberal sort of, conservative versus leftist sort of takes on people in positions of power, and sort of deconstructing sort of authority, the the leftist position is usually, it's a structural critique. It's saying that, like, you know, because of the systems in place, you end up with corrupt people in power. Whereas the conservative take is almost always just like, oh, no, just the people are bad, right? And that's the issue. And that's kind of the issue here, where you have, like, you know, oh, no, it's not that the military is an institution that, like, preys on people's, you know, bravado and toxic masculinity and sends them to die for something that they can have no hope in surviving. No, it's just that, like, the leaders in charge of the military don't know what they're doing. It's like, well, you know, it doesn't really work. And again, it feels like they really try to, like, the actual people of the military, they're really hyping them up and that they really always know. And there's this great, like, glory and confidence to what they're doing, even if what they're doing is a bad idea. And again, that could be handled really well if they show it as bad ideas, but they don't. And that's what makes it really frustrating. And there was one line that was said by someone, I don't remember who even said this, or one line, I just wrote it down in my notes, where it's, to rise above monsters, we have to abandon our humanity. And that line pissed me off, because I'm like, no, that is the absolute wrong thing to say. And here's the thing, if they want to treat it as, hey, here's a character saying this, but that character is not necessarily, like, and that's what that character believes, then that's fine. But I feel like how this show treats it, like, that quote and just how things are portrayed as, no, these are the good things, not what the characters think are the good things, right? That's a big difference, and that's why I feel like it's almost like sort of this weird sense of conservative propaganda. So it's this weird, all this militarism with stuff, it just bothered me. And then season 2 happens, and it shifts the focus, like, to the world itself instead of this whole, like, sort of military operations, which helps, but at the same time, it feels like, why didn't we do this before? Like, it seems to come out of nowhere, and, like, even more out of nowhere, these characters who were sort of very minor characters in season 1 are all of a sudden incredibly important in season 2. And it's like, well, wait a minute, why didn't you, like, actually build these characters up in season 1 instead of all of this, you know, military propaganda? You could have actually developed these characters that are, you know, potentially interesting, but now they're not because you sort of didn't develop them at all earlier. And, you know, meanwhile, there's a character who was very important in season 1 who is still around, but, like, you never see them after season 1. So what happened with that? So there's that problem. And again, like, you know, season 2, like, has, you know, the propaganda stuff is not as extreme, right? Because again, there is more of a focus on the actual characters, but again, they're on the characters that just seem to come out of nowhere. And the thing is, after season 2, I was like, okay, well, at least now we have some setup for some characters and stuff like that. And, you know, okay. But then season 3 goes in a different direction again, where it seems like it's sort of ignoring a lot of the stuff that happened in season 2, and it's establishing new things and new characters, and it's like, what? Just focus on the stuff that you need to focus on, and develop the things you need to focus on. Stop jumping around all the time. And it's really frustrating. And, like, the thing is, there's some stuff that's good here. Again, there's a lot of, even ignoring this fact that I said there's potential for good things, there are actual good things. Season 3, episode 18, in particular, is legitimately a very good episode. Okay, that is a very good episode, and I think that whole conflict within that episode is very good. So there's that. But just overall, though, it's just really messy. How the story handles its, story is very, very messy, and things are not developed in a way that really makes sense for how the overall story... It feels like this is written in a way where it doesn't feel like someone had an overall plan outside of maybe some overall lore. Besides that, they really didn't have an overall plan, an overall idea for all of these characters. Again, maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't feel that way. So that's an issue. And, like, especially at the end of season 3, in the last few episodes, where you do actually start to learn about the world, I can't really talk too much specifics about this because it is very much a spoiler, but, like, it really doesn't work how they present it. Basically, they present one group of people as victims when they were directly responsible for some horrible atrocities in the past. So, like, no, they kind of... So, like, if anything, they're not victims. They're, like, horrible genocidal murderers. And, like, the fact that people are, like, mad at them now is, like, kind of completely reasonable. So, like, it kind of defeats your whole point. So, so that doesn't really work very well. So, you know, but at the same time, I have to admit, how they end season 3, it feels like there's a chance that season 4 could work. So, but at the same time, I felt that way at the end of season 2, so about season 3, and, like, oh my god, I don't know. This show is just so frustrating to me, because I see the parts that work. I see the parts that could work, but so many times, they just don't do it, and it's really, really frustrating. And honestly, like, I can understand if you don't even want to get into the whole political aspect of things and you want to just see, like, the cool fights or whatever. I mean, they're mostly pretty cool, but, like, I don't know. Honestly, I feel like I've seen much better fights and other things, too, so... I don't know. I'm not sure. This is one of those, again, Evangelion, I felt more confident in my rating because, again, it was over, right? This is not over, right? Season 4 just started airing. Am I even going to watch Season 4? I have no idea. I don't know if I'm going to be watching Season 4. I don't know. And, like, again, I feel like if Season 4, it could be good. And if it is good, that would, like, maybe increase my rating a little bit. But also, it could be, like, really bad. And then it would, like, you know, make it way worse. I don't... Here's the thing. Overall, my opinion is negative. Okay, so it's going to be less than a 5 at the moment. But I see the potential. I see maybe it could work. Maybe. So I'm going to give it a 4. I'm going to give it a 4, but, like, depending on how Season 4 goes, I could see this. I don't think it's going to get any higher than a 5. Even if Season 4 is legitimately good, the first 3 seasons are just too problematic for me to probably give it any higher than a 5. But if Season 4 is bad, this could be, like, a 3, or maybe even worse if it's really bad. So... I'll give it a 4 for now, but this is very much in flux. And again, I don't even know if I'm going to see Season 4, so just... We need to move on. There's one more thing I want to talk about, and that is Persona 5, the animation. Now, I played Persona 5 this year, okay? And I played it from blind. I didn't know anything about story or characters going into it. And overall, I like the game quite a lot. However, in terms of the story, I had a few small issues here and there, but I had a kind of larger issue with how the ending was handled in terms of, like, pacing and how it mixed with the gameplay. And so I thought, hey, since there's this anime about this now, maybe it actually might work better in the anime in terms of the pacing with the ending. And also, I was also just curious, how are they going to handle this sort of pseudo silent protagonist and also a lot of the extra content with, you know, the confidants and stuff like that. So I was curious to check it out. So I did. And the thing is, it basically just felt like Persona 5 story, but it wasn't as good. And it makes sense, because Persona 5 story was written for Persona 5, which is a video game. So it makes sense that, you know, adapting it to a show, it might lose some of the stuff that made it work that well. And yeah, it does a little bit. The pacing actually is, I think, a little bit worse. Basically, my issues with the pacing in the ending of the game, instead of the anime fixing the pacing problems with the ending, it sort of had those pacing problems throughout most of it, where it felt sort of too fast, and things sort of just kind of came up and were resolved pretty quickly, and you didn't really get to feel a lot of time spent with a lot of the characters and a lot of the story elements and stuff. Because again, in the game, you have a lot more free time, and you can interact with characters, you know, how you want and whatever, so it fleshes out a bit more. Here, they just don't have the time to do that. So that does sort of knock things down a bit. And especially the beginning of the show feels very fast. So it feels like if I hadn't played Persona 5 and I watched this instead, I feel like I would be really confused early on, because I just wouldn't really be following what was going on. In terms of the protagonist, it is interesting because I could tell that some of the dialogue that he has is some of, like, the responses that you are given in terms of the dialogue options. So that was kind of interesting. Overall, though, they can't really do much with his character because you don't really have a character in the game. So, you know, it's okay. The extra confidants, they did at least introduce all of them, but they only kind of really followed through with some of them, which, again, I'm sure that was just sort of a time constraint with that, which is something. I did actually get to see a couple sort of things that I hadn't done in my playthrough of Persona 5, like, for example, Yusuke's sort of confidant storyline. I never got that far with him, so that's something I got a little bit extra from that. But, you know, and again, is the story bad? No, it's you know, Persona 5 story is overall good. So here we see an adaptation of an overall good story, just done a little bit worse. So, you know, take with that what you want. It's not a substitute for playing the game. If you really can't play the game for whatever reason, and you don't just want to, like, I don't know, watch a playthrough online or something, then I guess you can watch it, and it'll be fine. But it's not a replacement. I do think the story of the game, despite the problems I have with it, is overall done better. So, overall, I guess it gets a 7. It's kind of how that works. It's a good story, but it's handled just not quite as well as it could have been. So, I think I am finally done. Oh man, I'm kind of scared to look at how long this is. But I'm going to put up here on the screen sort of a tier list that I made showing just kind of my rankings of everything. Not just in terms of what numbers I give them, but also in terms of how I rank them within each tier. So the ones that, like, on the left side closest to the numbers are higher than the others. So if you're curious about my overall opinions and you want to go back, then there you go. Overall, I would definitely say anything in 8, 9, or 10, I would definitely recommend. 7, it sort of depends on if you are overall curious in it. 6, again, it depends. If you are very curious, might as well check it out. I don't think anything's bad. 5, I would skip the 5, and 4, well, I mean, Evangelion and Attack on Titan are pretty well known, so, I don't know. Anyway, so these are all the shows I saw in 2020. Hopefully you maybe got some recommendations of what to check out. And tomorrow we're going to have our full 2020 retrospective up. I still have a few more shows to talk about, some live action shows I'll be talking about with the other two, and we'll also go over games, movies, other stuff that we've seen this year, and you'll get to hear what my entire been up to, in addition to all the things we've watched together. And we'll try to avoid talking about just the state of the world, because that's not the point of that conversation. But, we'll see how things go. So, alright, thank you for listening to me ramble all the way through, and go out there and watch some good stuff. Alright, see you tomorrow.